Chapter 2209. Meg sighed as he opened the door of the Saipan Tavern, which had been closed for a few days. When he came to Rodu and bought this shop, he was also in high spirits and wanted to make the Saipan Tavern the best tavern in Rodu. Now, he only wanted to find someone to take over so that he could be carefree. You see, it was always so easy for adults to give up. However, the thriving Romo Street was having a second spring. Meg, who owned half of the street, had already made a lot of profits. Master. Before Meg and the rest sat down, Mara had already run in and greeted everyone. She went up to Meg and said, "I learned how to make pig tongue salad." "Really?" Meg asked with a smile. "Yes, I made one yesterday. Miss said it was delicious and it can be sold now." Mara nodded her head, her face full of confidence. "I happen to have pig tongue here. Make one now for me to try." Meg brought Mara into the kitchen and took out a pig tongue from the fridge. There were many standards for how delicious it was. Eiffel's standards were different from Meg's. Mara's talent in cooking was not bad, and she was diligent in her daily practice. However, whether the dishes she made could meet his requirements remained to be tested. "All right." Mara took her apron from the side and put it on. Then, she washed her hands and began to make the pig tongue salad. Meg stood at the kitchen door and nodded slightly as he watched Mara's familiar movements. It seemed that she had indeed put in a lot of effort in practicing these days. This made Meg feel very gratified. Learning to cook might be a passion at the beginning, but the most difficult thing was to be able to persevere for a long time. Mara's attitude towards cooking was at least proper and serious. The pig tongue was simmering in the pot. Meg looked at the free Mara and asked with a smile, "Cooking requires hard work and practice. What about being a boss? Do you have to be prepared?" "Be a boss?" Mara blinked and shook her head. "No, I really can't learn this. Is the Saipan Tavern planning to reopen? Many customers have been asking about it these days." Eiffel walked in and said with a smile, "I think our miss can do it." Mara immediately shifted the blame and looked at F for help. "Today, I'm here to ask Miss F if she's willing to take over the Saipan Tavern." Meg smiled as he looked at F. He was indeed worried about leaving Saipan Tavern to Mara. But Effie was different. She was a veteran and a smart woman. AI face stopped, looked into Meg's eyes, and asked seriously, "You really don't want to open this tavern?" From the very beginning, this is a tavern driven by interest. It was purely an accident that the customers liked it. Now, there are more important things waiting for me to do, so this tavern can only be taken care of by someone more suitable. Meg looked at Eiffel. "For example, Miss Eiffel." "No, it's not an accident that Saipan Tavern is so popular." AI Fei shook his head. "Mr. Hades, you're a professional. Regardless of whether it's the location and renovation of the shop, the brewing of wine, or the cooking of the dishes, they're all superior to the other taverns in Rodu. No matter who takes over, they won't be able to do as well as you." Meg smiled, but didn't say anything. However, AI Fei was telling the truth. No matter who took over Saipan Tavern, with Moutai and whiskey in hand, it would be able to maintain its position as one of the top taverns. But that was it. It could only maintain what it had, and it would be difficult for it to reach new heights. This was one of the things that Meg admired about AI Fei. She had a good eye. But there must be something more important that you need to do. So, Saipan Tavern can only be the one that's abandoned. AI Fei's expression was a little regretful. Although it was within her expectations, she still felt a little sad when she thought about how she couldn't continue to freeload in the future. "Miss AI Fei, you don't have to feel too much pressure because of this. After all, Titan Tavern is also very busy now. If there's no way to handle the pressure of 2 taverns at the same time, I can find someone else." Meg comforted her, feeling that he had indeed been a little too demanding. AI Fei looked at Meg, took a deep breath, and said as if she had made up her mind, "I'm willing to take over Saipan Tavern." Meg was a little surprised, but still smiled. "You're giving too much. I think there should be very few people who can refuse this," AI Fei said as a matter of course. According to Meg's previous promise, if AI Fei was willing to take over Saipan Tavern, she would receive 30% of the shares. With Saipan Tavern's current development, this was a very generous reward. Moreover, Meg would be responsible for the source of the drinks, while AI Faye would be responsible for the overall planning and management of the tavern, which was not difficult for her. Saipan Tavern's reputation had already spread. What she needed to do was to maintain this popularity and let the tavern continue to be popular. If that's the case, then let's directly sign the agreement. Meg took a contract from the counter and directly handed it to AI Faye. AI Faye carefully read the contract. Her expression was a little strange. She looked up at Meg. "You're so sure that I'll take over? I've always been good at reading people." Meg smiled. AI Faye signed the contract without hesitation, and Meg did the same with his name. From now on, after the ice cream shop, Meg had another shop that could make money. This was the so-called after-sleep income. Without doing anything, there would be a steady flow of money. Comfortable. After signing the contract, AI Faye was also one of his people. Meg asked her to stay for dinner, while he went into the kitchen to cook. Mara was on the side guarding the pig's tongue in the pot. While watching Meg cook, she said, "Oh right, master, the group leader Vicky you asked me to wait for really came. Is the opera house open?" Meg casually asked. "Yes, it's open. Last night's performance was very successful. The opera house was half full, and the response was very good." Mara nodded. Talking about the opera house seemed a little excited. "I have to go practice in the afternoon. You also want to learn opera?" Meg asked with a little surprise. I just want to learn for fun." Mara was a little guilty. Her eyes blurred, and she didn't dare to look at Meg. "It's right to have your own interests. There's nothing to be embarrassed about," Meg said with a smile, guessing the little girl's thoughts. Hearing Meg's words, Mara's eyes lit up again, and she nodded. "Opera is really super fun. Those opera actors are all very talented, and their singing is very good. I really like it. Yes, after lunch, I'm going to go watch a performance." "Is there an afternoon performance?" "Yes, there is. There are very few people in the afternoon, and the ticket price is 20% off." Mara nodded. Meg smiled, but didn't say anything. He was quite curious what kind of surprise the opera troupe would bring him after moving into the opera house. Chapter 22:10. Meg finished a table of dishes, and Mara finally finished making the pig tongue salad. Looking at the bright color, evenly sliced, and delicately arranged pig tongue salad, Meg nodded slightly. He had watched Mara make this dish, and the whole process was pretty good. She did what she needed to do, and the completion rate was very high. It could be seen that she really put in effort to learn and practice. Meg was quite satisfied with this disciple. "Try it." Mara stood at the table with her hands behind her back and looked at Meg nervously. Meg took a pair of chopsticks, picked up a piece of pig tongue, put it in front of his nose, and sniffed it. His eyebrows slightly raised, and then he put the pig tongue into his mouth. The crispy pig tongue was wrapped in red oil and chili sauce. The more he chewed, the more fragrant it was. It was really good. Meg put down his chopsticks, looked at Mara, and nodded with a smile. Not bad, but it's still 1,000 plates away from being able to be sold in the tavern. There are some problems with the red oil. The burnt taste is slightly strong, and the taste of the pig tongue still has room for improvement. It will take a long time to understand. "Okay, I understand." Mara listened carefully and then nodded solemnly. "I think it's enough to be sold in the tavern as a side dish. If this dish isn't available, then when the Saipan Tavern reopens, the customers can only stare at the empty tables." Ify also picked up a piece of pig tongue to taste and interrupted. "It's delicious. Sister Mara's cooking skills have improved." Amy chewed on the pig tongue and said happily, "To run a tavern, you still need to pursue something." Meg shook his head, looked at Ify, and said, "Quality can determine the difference between a tavern and other taverns. I hope that Saipan Tavern will always be that exquisite and beautiful existence. It's almost like a poison. Once it starts, it will lose its bottom line." Ify looked at Meg in silence for a moment, and then nodded. "I understand." Although he had become the owner, Meg still hoped that Saipan Tavern could stay true to its core. After lunch, Ify left. After taking over Saipan Tavern, the first thing she had to do was to recruit a new group of employees. Although Saipan Tavern already had 6 waiters, it was far from enough. After all, not everyone could be like Meg. Cashiers, waiters, kitchen staff, all of them had to be assigned. It was obviously unrealistic for the Saipan Tavern to reopen immediately. She had to rebuild a team. "Let's go to the opera this afternoon," Meg said to everyone as he cleared away the bowls and chopsticks. "Are you going to see Miss Black Cat?" Amy's eyes lit up as she asked, and also looked up at Meg with anticipation. "Yes, the Black Cat Opera House has moved to our street. Let's go take a look." Meg smiled and nodded. Carrying the large bag of clothes, he led his family and Mara to the Black Cat Opera House not far away. Soon, Meg arrived at Building 101. The once dusty circus venue had been cleaned up and looked brand new. On the door hung a simple wooden board with the words Black Cat Song Troupe. There had been a light drizzle in Rhodey yesterday, and the paint was chipping a little. Well, after moving to a new place, it still gave off a sense of poverty. It was indeed rare to see such a poor opera troupe. The door of the opera house was half open, but there was a wooden sign hanging on the door with the time of the performance. The afternoon performance would start at 1 o'clock. There was still half an hour until now. "I forgot to say that it's not time for the performance to start yet." Mara shrugged in embarrassment. "It's okay. I happen to have something to talk to Miss Vicky about." Meg smiled and walked in first. Mara hurriedly followed. Irina followed in with the two children and was holding a picture album in her arms. The light in the opera house was a little dim. The sunlight that came in through the small windows was not enough to provide sufficient light. Most likely because of poverty, there were no oil lamps in other places except for the stage. Moreover, they were not lit up at this time. The stage in the center had been simply remodeled. The newly painted countertop looked a little like an opera house. Unfortunately, the seats below the stage were too simple. The long benches were placed, making it look a little crowded and messy. Watching an opera in this kind of environment wasn't going to be a great experience. The opera troupe had just finished their lunch and were about to rest when they heard the commotion at the door. They all looked over. "Hello, it's not time for the afternoon performance yet. Please come back later." Olmi walked over with a smile. "Olmi, this is my master. He's here to look for the troupe leader." Mara jumped out and said to Olmi. Olmi walked closer and finally saw Meg's appearance. His face revealed a hint of surprise. "It's you." The Black Cat Song Troupe was able to move from a small, run-down courtyard to a place where no one cared about them. It was all thanks to this benefactor. Not only did he give them the venue, he also gave them the money to tide them over. Everyone in the opera troupe would remember this kindness. "Troupe leader, our benefactor is here." Olmi turned around and shouted. The opera troupe immediately rushed over. When they saw Meg and his family, they all smiled. This family had left a deep impression on them. The two young ladies were just too adorable. It was hard to forget them. Vicky, who was dressed in a black Lolita dress, quickly walked over from behind the stage. She stopped in front of Meg and smiled. "You're finally back. I heard that your opera troupe has already opened for business, so I wanted to come and take a look. It seems like I'm early." Meg smiled back. Meg still held a hint of respect for this lady with dual personalities. After all, you never knew what kind of personality she would change into in the next moment. "It's true that it's not time yet, but please take a seat here. I still haven't thanked you properly about the opera troupe." Vicky led Meg and the others to the troupe leader's office at the back. Although it was called the troupe leader's office, it was just a simple and crude office. There was a wooden table with a broken leg and two long benches. Vicky's seat was an old wooden chair. It was probably used as the boss's chair. "The opera troupe has just opened, so it's a little shabby. Please excuse me," Vicky said frankly. She didn't feel inferior at all. It's good to have a place to sit. Meg's impression of her improved a little. "Thank you for providing the venue for the Black Cat Song Troupe and providing so much support." Vicky bowed to Meg and said gratefully, "You're welcome. Your talent moved me." Meg waved his hand with a smile. "Besides, isn't this a mutually beneficial business?" Vicky smiled as well. However, the gratitude she felt towards Meg didn't decrease. Meg's investment and support for the opera troupe was no different from sending charcoal in snowy weather. He had saved them from a quagmire and pulled them back from the brink of disbandment. Vicky would always remember this kindness in her heart. Actually, there's another reason for my visit, and has already drawn the story of Miss Black Cat. Take a look and see if it matches your expectations," Meg said, and went forward and handed the album to Vicky. Chapter 22:11. You're done. Vicky was a little surprised. After all, it had only been a few days, but she still reached out to take the picture book. The cover was Miss Black Cat, who was climbing over the wall of the castle to escape at night. Miss Black Cat, who was sitting on the wall, seemed to symbolize something. She was not only looking over the wall, but also the shackles of the secular rules. Beyond the high wall, there was freedom. Vicky looked at the cover of the picture book for a long time, and a slight smile appeared on her face. The picture was exquisite and beautiful, and Miss Black Cat was very similar to her. Most importantly, the scene of her climbing over the high wall was chosen as the cover, and it was really to her liking. Then she flipped open the picture book and read it carefully. The story in the picture book was a little different from the opera. Some adjustments were made to the order, but it did not affect the story at all. In fact, it was more suitable to be told in a picture book. Part of the content was also deleted. After all, operas sometimes had very long singing parts. The picture book simplified this aspect, making the story more concise and clear. About 10 minutes later, Vicky finished half of the picture book. She gently closed the picture book in her hand and stood up to look at and said seriously, "Thank you very much for giving this story a new life," and was slightly surprised and then smiled happily. She said in sign language, "It was you who created this story. I'm very honored to be able to draw it. The drawing is so good, it completely exceeded my expectations. I like it very much, and I'm very satisfied." Vicky affirmed again, "Thank you," and smiled reservedly, but it was obvious that she was very happy. Meg's lips curled up. This feeling of being recognized by the original author should be good. It seemed that drawing comics was indeed very suitable for Anne, and it could let her gain more recognition. Since Miss Vicky is very satisfied with Anne's drawing, then let's talk about the licensing of the picture book's copyright. Meg looked at Vicky and said, "Mr. Hades, are you planning to print this picture book?" Vicky asked, "Yes, I think this is an excellent picture book. Whether it's the core of the story or the style, it's very good." Meg nodded. "Recently, I've been trying my hand at the picture book business. This is a good start." Vicky looked at Meg and thought. In the dungeon, copyright was highly valued, and authorization was protected by a series of strict regulations. Outstanding works could often obtain good licensing revenue. However, on the Norland continent, the laws and regulations in this area weren't very complete. Although there was the concept of copyright exclusivity, there didn't seem to be many cases of cross-industry licensing. The story of Miss Black Cat had a very special feeling for Vicky, but Anne's drawing was so good that it perfectly showed the core of the story. If this story was spread in the form of a picture book, it should receive a good response and sales in the market. It would bring some popularity to the Black Cat Opera House. Moreover, she was still short of money. Whether it was the renovation of the opera house or the recruitment of new actors, she urgently needed a large sum of money. "Mr. Hades, how do you intend to cooperate?" Vicky asked. Although she didn't know Meg's background, she felt that he was a trustworthy partner. Meg directly said, "Regarding the exclusive licensing of the picture book copyright of Miss Black Cat's story, I have two options for you to choose from. One, a direct buyout of 5 million copper coins. In other words, if I give you 5 million copper coins, I will get the copyright of Miss Black Cat's picture book. After that, I don't have to pay you any fees. 2, after deducting the cost from the sales volume, I will give you 20% of the profits. This is a long-term income with unknown and uncertainties. However, it may also bring you some unexpected gains." 5 million copper coins. Vicky's mind went blank. This was undoubtedly a huge sum of money for her, who used to think about how to support a troupe for a day with 1 copper coin. Even though she had returned to the dungeon this time, the proud her still didn't intend to rely on any help from her family. She had thought that Meg might ask for tens of thousands of copper coins, or even 100,000 copper coins to close the deal. 100,000 copper coins could be used to make a simple upgrade of the opera house. At least, it could be used to replace the shabby long benches and upgrade the lights. It could also be used to provide a sturdy bed for every troop member. She didn't expect Meg to offer a sky-high price of 5 million copper coins. Before this, Miss Black Cat was just a story that no one cared about, and it was almost a story that amused itself. Even now, the story's popularity was limited to the neighbors on Romo Street. Meg was offering too much. Meg smiled and looked at her without rushing her. He could tell that Vicky's identity wasn't simple, but she had a stubborn personality. He didn't know what choice she would make. Are you talking about 5 million copper coins? Vicky looked at Meg with uncertainty. Yes, this is the price that I can offer now. Meg nodded. This had far exceeded the copyright fees of all the picture books on the market. Did Vicky still think that it wasn't enough? Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. Miss Black Cat's story was indeed good. For the picture book market where men and women were in love, it had a strong, tearing effect. He could consider adding a little more. You think it's too little? Meg asked. No. Vicky shook her head. After realizing that Meg seemed to have misunderstood, she quickly said, 5 million copper coins is too much. I'm asking if you need to think about it again. As you said, there's a lot of uncertainty. Although the opera troupe was indeed short of money, Vicky didn't want to cheat Mr. Hades. After all, he was the one who pulled the Black Cat song troupe out of the mud pit and gave them new soil to grow on. I'm a businessman. Any decision is made after careful consideration. Since I can offer you 5 million, it means that you're worth the price. Meg smiled. His impression of Vicky improved a lot. This little girl was young, but she had a very good outlook on life. Seeing that Meg didn't look reluctant, Vicky thought for a while and said, Then I choose the first plan. 5 million copper coins to buy the picture book copyright of Miss Black Cat. She could do a lot with 5 million copper coins, and it was money she earned with her own talent. It was no pressure to spend it on the opera troupe. Are you sure you don't want to consider the share plan? Meg smiled. Well, the opera troupe is in urgent need of money now. I think this is a better choice. Vicky nodded firmly. Maybe the share plan was more imaginative, but the opera troupe needed a certain amount of money. Chapter 22:12. The signing of the agreement went very smoothly. Meg had already prepared the contract. The two signed it and pressed their fingerprints, and the contract came into effect. Meg took out the banknotes that he had already prepared and gave them to Vicky. He explained, These are banknotes from Buffett Banks. You can go to Buffett Banks and exchange them for cash. Okay, thank you very much. Vicky stood up and bowed deeply to Meg. Meg could be said to be a great benefactor that she had met at the lowest point of her life. You're welcome. After all, I'm also one of the shareholders of the Black Cat Song Troupe. I also hope that the opera troupe can become better. Meg said with a smile. He took the package from the side and said, There are some clothes inside. I saw that the costumes of the actors of the opera troupe were very old, so I custom-made a batch of costumes for them. Most of them were made according to Anne's comics. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. Vicky opened the package and looked at the gorgeous clothes. Her eyes lit up. Now, almost all the costumes of the opera troupe were made by themselves. There was no other way. The conditions were limited. If any of the costumes were custom-made, they would cost thousands of copper coins. Originally, after receiving the money, the first thing she had planned to do was to change the costumes for the troupe. She did not expect Meg to be so considerate as to prepare costumes for everyone. Your dress is a bit complicated. It's not ready yet. I'll have someone send it to you in a few days, Meg continued. Vicky's black Lolita dress also looked a bit old, but the layers of black did not look too obvious. I'm fine. Vicky blushed when she heard that Meg was going to send her dress. I'll rent this opera house to your opera troupe for 5 years at the price of 1 copper coin. I'll also reserve the 2 buildings next door for you. If you want to expand the venue, you can come to me at any time. Meg glanced at his watch. It's almost time for your performance. We'll wait outside. I think it'll take some time for you to get changed. Mr. Hades, thank you and your family for supporting the Black Cat Song Troupe. Vicky stood up and bowed to Meg and his family. Meg waved his hand and left the office. Vicky called the members backstage and distributed the clothes that Meg had brought. Commander, when did you order new costumes for us? Olmi looked at the gorgeous costumes in his hands. He was pleasantly surprised. Yeah, this material feels really comfortable to the touch. It must be very expensive, right? Whoa, it fits perfectly. Everyone chimed in and was very satisfied with the costumes. I didn't order this for everyone. It was a gift from Mr. Hades. Vicky smiled. She didn't expect Mr. Hades to be so considerate. He even made everyone's measurements just right. Wow, this boss is so nice. Not only did he give us the venue, he even prepared costumes for us. Yeah, if it wasn't for him, we would still be starving in that lousy courtyard. But Commander, you're not going to sell us out, are you? Everyone sighed. They looked at Vicky and couldn't help but ask this question. They had experienced the fickleness of human nature over the past 2 years. They knew that there was no such thing as unconditional love in this world. Mr. Hades has invested in our troupe, so he can be considered one of the bosses behind the scenes. However, he won't interfere with the management of the troupe. Don't worry, I won't give up control of the troupe. Vicky consoled them with a smile. Everyone let out a sigh of relief when they heard this. After all, the Maca troupe had tried to swallow them up before and had even poached a few of their members. Now they had a new boss. However, this wouldn't affect the troupe in any way. On the contrary, they felt like they had gained a backer. The remaining outfits should be for Ah Bao and the others, right? Ibaka looked at the remaining outfits in the bag with a complicated expression. Everyone looked at the remaining 6 or 7 outfits in the bag and thought of their companions who had accompanied them day and night. Their spirits sank. Why are you still thinking about those traitors? They were no longer part of our Black Cat song troupe the moment they left, Old Me said angrily. Don't say that. Ah Bao and the others have gone through thick and thin with us. The troupe was already forced into a corner. Even if they hadn't left, I would have brought them to join the Maca troupe. After all, survival is more important than anything else. Vicky shook her head. I'm going to have a chat with them in a few days. If they're willing to return, I hope that everyone will accept them as usual. Every member of the opera troupe had been brought back by Vicky. She had spent 2 years with them and taught them how to become professional opera singers for beginners. The feeling she had for them and the energy she had put into them made it impossible for her to give up on any of them. Now that she had the capital, as well as the opera house, it was time to invite back the members who had been poached. The opera troupe was severely understaffed. Each person was practically working as two, and the completion rate of the opera had dropped significantly. If she could recruit the members who had left, this situation would be greatly alleviated. She also had to consider a long-term plan to nurture opera singers. Opera singers had a lifespan, and a professional opera troupe needed a steady stream of new talent. That's right. The night before Fourth Sister left, she was sleeping on the same bed as me. She was so hungry that she tossed and turned, unable to sleep. She woke up to drink water several times. She even asked me softly if we could eat more if there were fewer people, Ibaka said with a sigh. Everyone fell silent. That period of time was indeed hard to bear. Everyone had considered leaving. Vicky clapped her hands. All right, everyone, change into your outfits and get ready to perform. Sir, I've asked around and finally found out that the Black Cat Song Troupe has moved here. It took a lot of effort. Outside the opera house, Pascal said to the young man beside him with a fawning expression. Bobby, who was dressed in luxurious clothes, looked at the wooden plaque hanging high up and frowned. Didn't you say that they couldn't hold on any longer? Why did they suddenly move to Romo Street and build such a big opera house? Pascal's expression stiffened. He rolled his eyes and said, I'm guessing that they moved here without permission. Hasn't Romo Street been completely deserted in the past 2 years? It used to be the venue of a circus, but it was abandoned and no one cared about it. They most likely moved here on their own accord, just like the shabby courtyard that no one wanted. That's not impossible. Bobby nodded. He was well aware of the Black Cat Song Troupe situation. Even food was a problem. It didn't make sense for them to suddenly have the money to rent such a big venue. Be polite when you go in later, but you must make Vicky agree to join your Marcus Song Troupe. Bobby tidied up his clothes and walked into the opera house. Of course, of course. Don't worry. Pascal patted his chest. Chapter 22:13. Bobby walked into the opera house, and the sudden darkness made him a little uncomfortable. He tripped on the leg of a chair and almost fell down. Be careful, sir. Pascal hurriedly reached out to support him, but he was secretly delighted. It seemed that he had guessed right. The Black Cat Song Troupe was as poor as ever. It was almost time for the show to start, but the opera house was still pitch black. They didn't even dare to light a lamp. Although they had moved indoors, there probably weren't many guests willing to come to this place. Most of their troupe still had to eat dirt to survive. But speaking of which, the actors that were poached from the Black Cat Song Troupe last time were really useful. Not to mention their professionalism, they didn't eat much, and they didn't ask for much. Now, they were basically the pillars of their Marcus Song Troupe. Although Boca gave a lot of money, the reason why he was so diligent in following the Black Cat Song Troupe was because he wanted to poach the remaining actors as well. As for the woman who wasn't easy to control, it would be best if Boca could take her away. He couldn't help but be afraid when he thought of the day when she scratched his face full of bloody marks. He didn't understand why Sir Boca liked this kind of thing. Why did he like to be beaten up? Don't let people know that we know each other. Boca pulled his hand out of Pascal's hand and rearranged his clothes. Yes, yes. Pascal nodded and took 2 quick steps forward. The opera house wasn't small. After all, it had inherited the original circus. But the long benches, no matter how neatly they were arranged, still looked a little shabby. Except for a few audience members sitting in the front row and other seats, the whole place was empty and particularly deserted. Boca glanced around and sighed inwardly. Even if they moved to Romo Street, the Black Cat Song Troupe still had no customers. Some time ago, 2 taverns on this street won the gold medal of the wine tasting conference and attracted a lot of attention. Even he went to the Titan Tavern to drink with his friends. When Pascal brought him here today, he was worried that Vicky had found a sugar daddy, but now it seemed that it was more like what Pascal had said. It was likely that the Black Cat Song Troupe had taken advantage of this empty house to temporarily occupy it as a theater. Miss Vicky is a girl of noble character. She must have her reasons for doing something like this. I'm too useless for letting a weak girl like her suffer like this. Bobby fell into deep self-blame. There aren't many people in the afternoon, but the leader still insists on having 2 matches a day, Mara explained to Meg. Well, it's good to practice more. Meg nodded and glanced at the empty opera house. His eyes fell on Pascal and Bobby, who entered the theater one after another. Father, isn't that the leader of the opera troupe that we slept with last time? Amy whispered. Yeah. A smile appeared on Mag's face. He also remembered the person walking in front. It was the leader of the opera troupe that they went to for the first time. If you remember correctly, it was called the Marca Song Troupe. The level of the actors was quite amateur. They slacked off a lot in their performances and sang to make people fall asleep. The only praiseworthy thing was that it was really easy to sleep with. If you had to give a guide, it would be, please bring your own quilt and pillow. Speaking of which, this person should be a competitor of the Black Cat Song Troupe. Why was he here? Was he here to cause trouble? Mag took another look at the well-dressed young master behind them. He had overheard the conversation between the 2 of them, and it seemed like this was the real deal. As the behind-the-scenes shareholder of the Black Cat Song Troupe, Meg sat calmly and was ready to watch the show. What a joke. Miss Black Cat was not a kitten that could be trampled on. She could lead a group of old and weak women and children to mingle in the underworld. She was not someone who could be easily bullied. In comparison, that young master looked like he could not even stand a gust of wind. Pascal walked to the front of the stage and looked around. When he did not see anyone, he walked straight to the backstage. Boca found a seat in the front row and sat down. He looked calm, but his right leg trembled subconsciously, revealing his inner nervousness. My friend, this is the backstage. You fat piece of paper. What are you doing here again? Pascal had just lifted the curtain when a loud roar came from behind him. Pascal's hand trembled and the curtain fell. He could not help but take 2 steps back. This leader is not very good. Meg frowned slightly. He was actually pushed back by a little soldier. The curtain was lifted again, and Uncle Ibaka, who was dressed in luxurious black clothes, strode out. He looked at Pascal with a dignified aura, even without being angry. Uncle Ibaka played the role of Miss Black Cat's father in the opera. He was a rich and powerful man. Ibaka, who was in character, stood there. His imposing manner made Pascal speechless for a moment. Who is this person? Boca was also carefully sizing up Ibaka. This man was dressed in luxurious clothes and had a dignified look between his brows. He was even more imposing than his father. You're the actor playing the role of the old master. Pascal looked at him for a while before recognizing Ibaka's identity. He was amused and annoyed at the same time. He did not expect to be intimidated by a mere actor. Where did this scoundrel come from? Don't you know where you are? How dare you act so presumptuously here? At this time, another loud voice sounded from behind the curtain. A woman in luxurious clothes and elegant makeup walked out from behind the curtain. She looked at Pascal coldly and scolded him. Pascal shrunk his neck in fear. Even the madam of an official's family might not have such an imposing manner. He could not help but size her up carefully. Although Macca Opera House had always been lukewarm, he had seen a lot of upper-class people. He was still a bit sensitive to the clothes of the rich. This woman's clothes and aura were a bit more noble than many noble ladies. The actors have all changed into new clothes today. An old man next to him chuckled. Pascal came back to his senses. This was not a noble lady. She was just an actress who was used to playing the role of a noble lady and had changed into a noble lady's clothes. Not expecting to be intimidated by two actors in a row, Pascal could not help but be furious. He said in exasperation, "Get away from me. Get away." A contemptuous sneer sounded. The curtain was lifted and Vicky walked out. She looked at Pascal and said coldly, "Who do you think you are?" The petite Vicky stood in the middle of a group of actors, but it was difficult to hide her sharpness. Her disdainful gaze was like a young lady standing in the clouds looking down at the rotten fish and shrimps on the ground. It was like the arrival of a young lady. That feeling. Chapter 22:14. In the past, Pascal had proudly looked down on the Black Cat Song Troupe, who were dressed in rags and had pale faces. That was the feeling of superiority of a successful person. But now, looking at the extravagantly dressed actors surrounding Vicky, the once weak people were now glowing, and that feeling of superiority suddenly disappeared. Under everyone's gaze, he even felt a sense of inferiority. Even if he used his but to think, he could tell that the Black Cat Song Troupe had most likely met a big financial backer. Not to mention other things, just the luxurious costumes alone cost tens of thousands of copper coins to customize. In that case, this opera house might not be occupied by them, but rented directly. Cough, cough. Leader Vicky, why are you so distant? Didn't we have a few friendly conversations before? I'm Pascal, the leader of the Marcus Song Troupe. Several of your companions are now members of our troupe. Even if you're rich now and have met a big financial backer, you can't turn your back on us. Pascal quickly smiled. The situation was not quite what he had imagined. The promise he had made to Boca before was most likely going to fall through. He had to think of another way to try. After all, his financial backer was watching from behind, and he had to perform well. Meg looked at this scene, and the corners of his mouth curled up. The development of this plot was a little different from what he had imagined. But this fat leader was quite discerning. He knew how to steer with the wind and was not a reckless pig. But his ability to speak still needed to be improved. On the side, Boca heard Pascal's words and looked at the extravagantly dressed actors. He clenched his fists, and his body could not help but tremble. Angry, trembling, cold. He felt as if he had suddenly been stripped naked and thrown into a world of ice and snow, and the world was far away from him. In the end, had she gone to find another financial backer? In order to let the actors wear gorgeous costumes, let them eat their fill, and let them have a stage to shelter them from the wind and rain. But why didn't she come to him? Why did she find someone else? He felt pain. He opened his mouth, but he could not say a word. But it didn't matter that he could not speak. The opera troupe was full of anger, and after hearing Pascal's words, they immediately exploded. They were just missing those friends who had left in difficult times, and now one of the culprits was here to show off. I didn't hit you because I want to leave a good impression on the audience, Ibaka said as he looked coldly at Pascal. But you'd better not let us see you outside the theater, or your face will bloom, I promise, the madam next to him said. Pascal took 2 steps back in fear, and his expression changed slightly. These people, after eating their fill, they became so scary. Pascal looked at Vicky with a serious expression and said, "Actually, I'm here today to talk about cooperation with leader Vicky. We're all in the same industry, and in Rodu, there are only two opera troupes. Now, no one knows much about opera. If we can combine forces and work together to let more people know what opera is, we can expand the pie together. Isn't that a good idea?" "Heh, not only do other people not know what opera is, you probably don't even know what opera is," Vicky said coldly. It was not that she looked down on Pascal, but the Marca Opera Troupe's professional standards were a complete disgrace to opera. People went to watch opera full of anticipation, but ended up having a good night's sleep. When they woke up, they would only remember that they had a good night's sleep. Who would spend money to watch an opera in the future? This guy who only thought about making money from the audience was a cancer in the opera industry. "You can insult me, but you can't insult my professional standards," Pascal said seriously. "Talking about opera with you is an insult to the performance itself." Vicky pursed her lips. You. Pascal was furious, but there was nothing he could do. Now that the Black Cat Song Troupe was living a prosperous life, he could no longer see any desire for food in their eyes. It was clearly unrealistic to try to seduce them to join the Marca Opera Troupe. With Vicky's attitude, it was also impossible for the two opera troupes to combine forces. Pascal said angrily, "Don't think that everything will be fine just because you found a tycoon. Let's see how much time you have left to perform on stage in the future." Vicky's face turned cold, and a hint of killing intent appeared in her almond-shaped eyes. However, before she could say anything, a low voice sounded in the audience. "Shut up! You shut up!" Boca suddenly stood up, and the bench was overturned. He clenched his fists and looked at Vicky with a pained and conflicted expression. When Boca spoke, Pascal immediately cowered. He said submissively, "Mr. Boca, she's with someone else. Get out of here." Boca roared at him. Pascal immediately stepped aside, not daring to make another sound. Meg and his family were already munching on sunflower seeds. They crossed their legs and calmly watched the foreplay. Boca's expression changed several times, switching between pain, relief, conflict, and forgiveness. All the opera actors present felt ashamed of their inferiority. "Miss Vicky, I didn't know that you had such a rich friend. You never told me because you were afraid that I would overthink. You're always thinking about me. You're so good to me. I like you more and more." Boca looked at Vicky affectionately and said, "Seriously?" Meg raised his eyebrows and stared at Boca with his head tilted. "Huh, is this what you mean by affectionate?" Irina also said with a smile. "No, this can only be called a bootlicker," Meg thought. Vicky showed some disgust and looked at Boca coldly. "I've already made it very clear that I don't like you. Please disappear from my sight. If you try to disgust me with such a despicable person again, I won't let you go." Boca staggered 2 steps forward and clutched his chest. He said in pain, "Don't push me away. I want to see you every day. You can choose the location, whether it's the forest, the desert, the lake at night, the grassland, the sea, or the street with the mist in the morning. Just don't dream anymore. Go back and wash up and sleep early. You can have everything in your dreams." Vicky said coldly. Boca was stunned. He looked at Vicky in a daze. Tears fell from the corners of his eyes uncontrollably. He heard the sound of something breaking. It was probably his heart. "Maybe he's better and more suitable for you. Then go, I'll let you go. But remember, if you want to come back one day, I'll still be here waiting for you. I'll always be waiting for you. You're weak. Ask him to be gentle. My heart will ache." Boca sobbed. "Crawl." Vicky grabbed a stool nearby. "Leader, calm down." The actors hurriedly pulled her back. "Young master, let's go first." Pascal also hurried forward to help Boca stagger out. "That dazed look, he's like a dog," Amy said as she looked at Boca's back. Meg nodded in agreement. In the end, there was nothing left. Chapter 22:15. Boca left the theater with Pascal's help, looking very much like a dog with a broken heart. Meg looked at Vicky, who had put down the stool and regained her composure, and smiled. This girl was quite sensible. She had rejected him clearly, but the bootlicker was too persistent. Mara ran to the door to help sell the tickets. As a part-time tool of the opera house, She could be trained by the actors for free by helping to sell the tickets. 10 minutes later, Miss Black Cat opened. There were only a dozen guests in the theater. However, the actors who had changed into new costumes still presented a wonderful opera to the audience. This opera is quite interesting. Irina looked at the actors on the stage with a smile. She did not go to the opera with them last time, so it was her first time watching an opera performance. Elves are good at singing and dancing. It might be good to set up an elven opera troupe. Meg suggested seriously. It was a tradition of the elves. Almost every night when the weather was good, there would be a lively singing and dancing party in the open space of the textile factory. Meg also liked to watch the beautiful elven girls dance gracefully and sing songs that sounded like the sounds of nature. Of course, it was the children's request. Irina thought seriously for a while and nodded. That's a good idea. It would be even better if we could arrange an opera with the night elves as the theme. About the script of the opera, we can discuss it with leader Vicky. I don't think there is anyone more professional than her in this aspect. Meg glanced at Vicky, who was walking towards them after getting off the stage. Mr. Hades, is your family satisfied with the performance? Vicky walked up and asked with a smile. It was a wonderful performance. Meg nodded. The actors in the new costumes made the performance more natural, and there were fewer scenes. But what about the other actors? Why are there so many of them? The opera troupe originally had 15 or 16 people, but today, including Mara, who had no lines, there were only 9 of them on the stage. Vicky smiled. They are temporarily separated, but I believe they will return soon. Meg nodded thoughtfully. It must have something to do with Pascal, which was why the opera troupe was so angry with him. However, even in the absence of a large number of people, Vicky and the others still presented a highly completed opera. Sister Vicky, you guys must be very rich, right? Amy asked curiously. Vicky was slightly taken aback and immediately smiled sweetly. Xiao AI, do I look like a young lady from a rich family? Yes. Amy nodded firmly. Maybe. Vicky nodded with a smile, not saying anything. The performance tonight will start a little later. I'll treat your family to dinner to thank you for your help, Vicky said. Why don't we eat at our place? I'll cook. It's more comfortable to eat at home, Meg suggested. Will it be too much trouble for you? It's fine. I quite like to cook. Then I won't stand on ceremony and freeload, Vicky said with a smile. Meg and his family returned to the tavern first, and he asked Mara and Eiffel to come over for dinner that night. Irina walked around the tavern, opened the back door, and looked at the flowers and plants that were growing well in the yard. She said regretfully, I've lived here for a month, and I can't bear to give it up just like that. Meg walked behind her with a smile and said, Then we'll come and stay here for a few days every month. Just treat it as a vacation home and keep it. Irina's eyes lit up, and she said with a smile, That's a good suggestion. It's suitable to take care of the flowers and plants once a month. New mission. Enhance the relationship between neighbors. As the old saying goes, close neighbors are better than distant relatives. Host, please cook for your neighbors to enhance their relationship. Amy, who was tying Ugly Duckling's hair, suddenly received a mission from the system. Stupid system. This will only destroy the relationship between neighbors. Amy retorted, unmoved. Life experience system. Why don't you change the mission to alienate neighbors? That way, I'll just have to cook for them every day, Amy continued. As a heaven-chosen host, how can I give up so easily? Good neighborhood relationships need to be managed, and this is also a part of life experience. Host, please work hard to complete the mission. Knock, knock. Knocking sounds came from the door. Amy got up and ran toward the door, and she tiptoed to open the door. Wow, Big Sister Eiffel, you're so beautiful today. Xiao AI likes you so much. I want a hug. Really? Xiao AI is so cute too. Come, let Big Sister give you a hug. Eiffel smiled like a flower and bent down to pick up Amy. She couldn't help but plant a kiss on Amy's tender cheek. Favorable impression from Eiffel plus 99. Life experience system, young system. In the end, it was still taught a lesson by a young host. Enhance the relationship between neighbors. Mission canceled. A line of small words silently slid past. Eiffel came with Mara, and Mara followed behind with 2 bottles of wine in her hands. You didn't have to bring anything. As the hostess, Irina smiled and said politely, I feel a little embarrassed to come here every day for free meals. Eiffel hugged Amy and said with a smile, one bottle is brewed by me, and the other bottle is a cellar wine brewed by my father. Towards this beautiful wife of Mr. Hades, Effie could not feel the slightest bit of jealousy other than envy. After all, she was too beautiful, and even as a woman, she couldn't help but want to take a few more glances at her. In comparison, Mr. Hades was the one who had the advantage. Moreover, his two daughters were also smart and cute. Although they were still young, it could be seen that they would definitely grow up to be as beautiful as their mother. It was just a pity that she didn't even have the chance to be a concubine. No, I'm Eiffel. How can I be a concubine? Eiffel chased out the messy thoughts in her mind and corrected her worldview. Vicky followed behind her, also carrying a small box in her hand. Group leader. Mara warmly greeted. Mara, Miss Eiffel, you guys are also here. Vicky was a little surprised. Because of Mara, she also recognized Eiffel. Moreover, Titan Tavern was now the most famous tavern on Romo Street, and Eiffel had also introduced many guests to the opera house. Yes, today is another day of freeloading. Eiffel smiled and nodded. She felt that she had already gotten used to the feeling of freeloading. When she thought about how Mr. Hades and his family might not appear for a long time in the future, she felt an indescribable sense of emptiness in her heart. She didn't know if it was because she couldn't continue to freeload or because of other reasons. Chapter 22:16. Vicky gave the gift to Irina. She hadn't seen her face clearly due to the dim light, but now that she had a closer look, she couldn't help but praise, "You're so beautiful. Delicate skin, exquisitely carved face, full breasts. With such good looks and a good figure, even women couldn't help but fall in love with her. No wonder AI and I were so beautiful and cute." She didn't quite understand when she first saw Mr. Hades, but now the case had been solved. She had completely inherited her mother's perfect genes. You too. It would be even better if you could grow taller. Irina accepted the gift with a smile. She glanced at Vicky's chest and restrained herself. Vicky's lips twitched. She was a little angry, but she decided to let it go for the sake of her face. After all, she was so beautiful. Yes, I think I'll grow taller. After all, I'm still young. Vicky nodded. Age was her biggest advantage. After all, she didn't look much older than Anne. Yes, you were a little small. Irina nodded. Vicky, she tried to straighten her chest, trying to prove that she wasn't small. That's all right. I'll give you a good prescription one day, and I guarantee that you'll grow up faster. Effie put her arm around Vicky's shoulder with a smile and whispered in her ear, Don't touch me. Vicky tilted her head and asked in a low voice, Really? Personally tested, it's effective. Effie laughed so hard that the gigantic abyss trembled as well. Vicky looked at the abyss and immediately put on a smile. It's all up to you, big sister. The women chatted, and the atmosphere was quite harmonious. Meg was cooking in the kitchen. He looked back at Irina with a smile. Irina didn't have many friends. Perhaps it was because of her identity, but apart from Phyllis, she didn't have any close friends. When she communicated with others, she was more or less distant. However, after she removed her identity as the elven princess and talked to others as the tavern owner, it was more like she was making friends. It was pretty good. Even though he could see all the mountains and the clouds, it was still too lonely and boring. Walking down from the clouds and stepping into the mundane world, he was able to experience happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy even more, adding a bit of vitality. Meg made quite a number of dishes, such as grilled fish, braised beef, and a beggar's chicken that had been stripped of its mud casing in the kitchen. There are also a few dishes that he had made simple but effective changes to Mamie's recipes. After all, Amy's was famous. Meg didn't want them to simply associate the two together. He just needed to make some simple changes and use self-study as an excuse. Gulp. Vicky couldn't help but gulp at the sight of all the delicious dishes on the table. What kind of celestial man was this? She had actually cooked up such a sumptuous dinner in the kitchen alone, and it looked so tempting. Originally, She didn't expect much from Meg when he said that he would cook at home. However, since it was proposed by her sugar daddy, she couldn't refuse. But he didn't expect to see such a table of dishes. Even at the high-class banquets in the underground city, she didn't feel such a desire for food. After all, those delicate-looking dishes were actually mediocre in taste, and they didn't have such a direct and stimulating aroma attack. Mr. Hades, if you're going to open a restaurant someday, please let me know. That way, I'll be able to provide for all 3 of my meals. AI Faye looked at Mag with a serious expression. Although Mara had also learned a few tricks from Hades, and her culinary skills had improved greatly, she was still a far cry from Hades' standard. Thinking that she wouldn't be able to freeload such delicious food in the future, she couldn't help but feel a little sad. Actually, my culinary skills are just average. If AI Faye really wants to try delicious food, you can go to Mamie's in Rodu. The dishes made by Mr. Meg are the real delicacies in the world, Meg said with a faint smile. Irina glanced at him. Is it all right for me to praise myself? Is Mamie's very famous? Vicky asked curiously. It's super famous. It's said to be the most delicious restaurant on the Norland continent. The head chef, Mr. Meg, is also the most charming man on the Norland continent. Mara answered quickly. She glanced at Meg and added, Of course, it's still not as good as my master. Meg nodded slightly. This double bootlicking was very effective on him. Seems like we can try it when we're free. Vicky nodded. But it's far away. It's in Chaos City. I heard it takes about a month to get there, Mara said regretfully. She had to try it even if they didn't let her. All right, everyone should be hungry. Let's eat, Meg said with a smile. Even with his thick skin, he couldn't stand too much bootlicking. Meg picked up 2 pieces of chicken for Amy and Anne, and then began to eat the grilled fish. Vicky only picked up her chopsticks when she saw Meg starting to eat, and picked up a piece of braised beef in front of her. The braised beef that was cut into cubes looked red and alluring. The rich aroma of the meat wafted over, and Vicky, who had been eating fast food for a few days, broke her defense instantly. She couldn't take it anymore. She stuffed a big piece of braised beef in her mouth, and her little cheeks puffed up instantly. However, she couldn't care less about her table manners. She bit into the braised beef, and the gravy burst in her mouth instantly. That wonderful texture made her taste buds go wild, and her soul rose to the sky. This feeling of being filled up, it was simply too blissful. She chewed and swallowed. The large piece of meat was quickly swallowed into her stomach. This is too good. Eat it. Vicky's eyes were filled with tears. Even though she was born into a wealthy family and had eaten countless delicacies in the eyes of ordinary people, she had never felt so satisfied with food. It was clearly just an ordinary piece of beef that could be bought for a few dozen copper coins at a street corner market, but Hades had turned it into an extremely delicious dish. Only after eating the braised beef today did she realize that meat actually tasted like this. Vicky's gaze toward Meg also changed a little. He had changed from a rich uncle to a good man with full marks for cooking. Wasn't a good man who could cook. If there was a man who could cook such delicious braised beef for her every day, she would also be willing to marry him. After eating 3 pieces of beef and a few mouthfuls of rice, Vicky felt that her stomach was finally satisfied. Then, her gaze fell on the plate of grilled chicken that had been cut up. The tender grilled chicken skin was slightly yellow, and the chicken skin was slightly oily. It looked like it should be crispy, but the chicken still maintained its tender and juicy state. She picked up a piece of chicken and bit into it together with the skin. The skin was very fragrant, crispy, and didn't stick to her teeth. The chicken was indeed tender, and the meat was juicy. The seasoning was also very flavorful. The grilling experience was different from the braised beef in one bite. Vicky opened her legs slightly and couldn't help but let out a sigh. This was too good. Chapter 22:17. The delicious roast chicken shocked Vicky so much that she almost lost control. After swallowing the chicken, she closed her legs and blushed. It was too shameful. As a lady who had been educated as a socialite since she was young, how could she have such a reaction in front of other men? Is it delicious? Ify looked at her with a smile. Her reaction was not much better than Vicky's when she tasted Hades's food for the first time. The delicious food seemed to have some kind of magical power. No matter how much self-control one had, they still could not control themselves when they tasted it for the first time. It's delicious. Vicky nodded. That was an undeniable fact. Mr. Hades's culinary skills are too amazing. It's amazing. Vicky looked at Mag with a serious expression and said, "If you're going to open a restaurant, please let me know." Okay. Meg nodded with a smile. After eating the roast chicken and roast fish, Vicky felt that she was a fickle woman. Her preferences seemed to change all the time, and this change was only because she tasted the next dish. Perhaps it was because the food was too delicious. The atmosphere was very harmonious. They talked and laughed, and their relationships became much closer. Vicky, other than Miss Black Cat's opera, did your opera troupe prepare any other operas? Irina looked at Vicky and asked curiously. Yes, we prepared about 5 operas. Vicky nodded and shrugged helplessly. But because of the loss of the opera singers, only Miss Black Cat can perform. Were they poached by the fat captain this afternoon? Meg interrupted. Actually, I'm not too angry about this. After all, they were almost starving to death when they followed me. If they went to his place, at least they would have something to eat. Vicky smiled and said in a carefree manner, "Well, you can't let people starve to death for your dreams." Meg nodded. This was one of the reasons why he admired Vicky so much. Speaking of new plays, I've been planning to write a play about this war. Vicky's eyes seemed to sparkle when she talked about opera. This war? What would he write? Do you want peach trees or glutinous rice? AI Faye tilted her head. The scene of everyone chopping down the peach trees and piling them up on the street is indeed a bit shocking. But does that mean we won't have any peaches to eat next year? Mara also said, but it was a pity for the peaches. Meg and Irina smiled knowingly. For ordinary people, the thing that left the deepest impression on them was naturally the large-scale operation to seize the peach trees and glutinous rice. Although it had been 2 days since the end of the war, the soldiers on the front lines might not have returned home yet. The detailed news was only circulated among certain social classes. However, the legend of Alex saving the city again had already begun to circulate in the major tea houses and restaurants. The story was so well made up that even Meg couldn't help but want to say, "Good guy." As a literary creator, Vicky most likely heard some related news and then came up with the idea of writing a play. No. Seizing the peach trees and glutinous rice was only a part of the war. It was only a small part of the logistics. The real exciting part was the war that happened in the extreme north. You might not be able to imagine the scene of millions of skeletons rushing over. The giant dragons dropped large amounts of explosives, and hundreds of thousands of human archers shot millions of arrows consecutively. That scene, even the word magnificent is not enough to describe it. Of course, the most shocking scene was when Alex slashed the bone dragon with his sword and lured the devil into the formation with his own body. Then, he cleverly used the teleportation formation that had been arranged in advance to escape, successfully sealing the devil and ending the war. Alex is simply too cool. You can't find another man like him in the world. Vicky was very excited as she spoke. Towards the end, she even looked like a fangirl. How does this girl know so much about what happened at the front lines? Meg raised his eyebrows and looked at Vicky in surprise. The details were exactly the same. Even among the soldiers on the front lines, only a few of them knew what he had done. This was also the reason why the rumors in the tea houses were so ridiculous. Are you attracted to him? Irina looked at Vicky with a faint smile. It's very difficult not to be. Vicky nodded. Meg carefully glanced at Irina and felt a sense of danger. Vicky quickly added, but of course it's impossible. Princess Irina is also super beautiful. She's on par with you, sister. I'm afraid only a beautiful and powerful woman like her would be a perfect match for Alex. Meg secretly heaved a sigh of relief for this girl. Is that so? Irina's face showed a hint of smile. She pulled out her sword halfway and then put it back. Wasn't that right? In this world, the only person who could be compared to her in terms of beauty was herself. Leader, how do you know so much? You weren't around for the past 2 days. Don't tell me you went to the front lines? Mara asked curiously. Vicky's expression stiffened. She felt that she was a little reckless. She actually said so many things that she shouldn't have. It would be a little troublesome for her to cover it up now. Meg and Irina looked at each other. There was a hint of playfulness in their eyes. How is that possible? I can't even pick up a sword. How could I go to the front lines to be cannon fodder? Vicky smiled awkwardly and said, I went home to visit my family 2 days ago. I happened to meet an elder who came back from the front lines. I heard from him. She's lying. Meg and Irina could both tell. A person's micro-expressions could reveal a lot of things. Judging from the time, Vicky could indeed have appeared on the front lines of the ice field. It was just that they didn't know what kind of identity she had appeared in. However, if she was a young mistress from a rich family, why would she go to the front lines? This was not something to be taken lightly. Even a 10th-tier powerhouse could lose his life. So you intend to write a script related to Alex? Meg asked with a smile. He didn't expose Vicky's lie. I'm just thinking about it. After all, it's very difficult to find someone who can play him. Also, the setting is too big. You don't know how scary that demon is. I really can't reproduce it on stage. Vicky shook her head. Then if someone asks you to write a script, will you help? Irina asked. Not so far. After all, there are only 2 opera troupes in Rodu. Of course, if there's an interesting idea or story, I might give it a try, Vicky said with a smile. Irina nodded slightly. She had a rough idea of what to do. After dinner, Ev and Vicky took their leave. The Titan Tavern and the Black Cat Opera House were both open for business at night. Chapter 22:18. The Black Cat Song Troupe's first performance in their new costumes was a great success. Decent and appropriate costumes, beautiful singing, and an exciting plot. Even in the shabby opera house, they still gave the audience a wonderful performance. After the performance, Vicky bowed and thanked the audience with the actors. All the audience stood up and applauded, and it took a long time before they stopped. In the corner of the last row of the venue, a few average-looking audience members watched the scene with tears in their eyes. The leader's dream has come true. That's great, a young man said with a smile. Yes, but it has nothing to do with us. If we had persevered a little longer, we would be standing on the stage with them now. A middle-aged man said with a sigh. Let's go, we should go back. The few of them lowered their heads and walked slowly toward the door with the crowd, looking somewhat lonely. They had gone through the most difficult times together, but they became deserters before the dawn came. However, to be able to see their former partners standing on the stage and performing the opera that they had worked so hard to rehearse together, they were still moved to tears. Since you're here, are you planning to leave without saying a word? The group walked to the door and was about to leave when a voice sounded in front of them. Everyone looked up and saw Vicky standing outside the door. Leader, everyone called out subconsciously. Then everyone lowered their heads in shame, not daring to look at Vicky's eyes. What do you think of today's stage? Vicky asked with a smile. It was the best stage I have ever seen. Your performance was intoxicating. Fer looked up and said with a serious face. The others nodded as well. Today's opera performance had made them excited. Maybe it was because of the costumes. They felt that everyone had performed better than usual and contributed to a wonderful opera. Sorry, leader, we didn't even say goodbye when we left. Abao lowered his head and said softly. The others also blamed themselves and did not dare to look at Vicky's eyes. They were all saved by Vicky from a desperate situation. They were all working towards the same dream, supporting and encouraging each other, but they had become deserters. I have never blamed you for this. If you had said goodbye to me, I wouldn't have known how to persuade you to leave. Vicky looked at them with a smile. If you go there, at least you'll have something to eat. If you stay, you'll only starve. Everyone became even more ashamed when they heard this. But things are different now. We have our own theater, new costumes, and an audience that can appreciate us. Plus, we have food to eat every day. We can eat meat every meal. Vicky stepped forward, looked at the crowd, and said seriously, Come back, I need you. The Black Cat Song Troupe needs you. Commander. Everyone looked up at Vicky in disbelief. They had expected to be scolded and mocked by Vicky. At the very least, she wouldn't want to see traitors like them. However, they didn't expect that their leader would actually ask them to come back. Yeah, Lao Si Abao Shao Chi, come back. It's tiring for each of us to play so many roles. Plus, only you can perform your roles the best. Ibaka appeared beside Vicky. Come back, we need you. The Black Cat song troupe members who had not changed out of their costumes came out from the side door and came to Vicky's side. They looked at Abao and the others and said, "Everyone." Abao and the others could not help but cry. The audience who were about to leave stopped when they saw this scene. Some people even tried to persuade them. "Commander, although we really want to come back, I'm afraid we can't." Abao wiped away his tears and shook his head. The eyes of Old Fourth and the others also showed a bit of sadness. "Why?" Vicky looked at Abao and frowned. "Did Pascal force you to sign something?" Abao looked at Vicky, hesitated for a while, and said guiltily, "When we joined Market Troop, Pascal made each of us sign a contract. We have to stay in Market Troop for 3 years. If we leave halfway, we have to pay a penalty of 50,000 copper coins." 50,000 copper coins. Everyone in the opera troupe gasped. For the opera troupe that had just started on the right path, this was undoubtedly a huge sum of money. Even if there were a lot of audience members tonight, the ticket revenue was only 3 to 4,000 copper coins. After deducting expenses, they would not be able to save much money in a month. Abao and the others had 8 people, so 50,000 copper coins per person would be 400,000 copper coins. Obviously, it was not something that the Black Cat song troupe could afford right now. "You could go back today. Tomorrow, I will personally go to Market Troop and bring you back. You don't have to worry about the money." Vicky waved her hand and said resolutely. "But leader," Abao was a little anxious. "Since you still call me leader, then do as I say. Don't be so wishy-washy." Vicky raised her eyebrows coldly, and her aura immediately rose. Abao only felt that his neck was cold. He shrunk his neck subconsciously and did not dare to say anything more. "That's enough. Don't block the door anymore." Vicky stood aside and made way. Everyone hurriedly moved aside so that the audience could continue to leave. Abao and the others went back first, and so did the audience. "Leader, is the money really okay?" Ibaka looked at Vicky and asked, holding the money bag in his hand. "I haven't spent the salary I got yesterday. You can use it to make up for it." "Me too. I had a bowl of noodles, and the rest is still here. I bought a dress, but it only cost me 30 copper coins. The rest is here." Everyone took out their own money and handed it over. Vicky looked at the ragged money bags in everyone's hands and smiled. She reached out and pushed Ibaka's hand back. Then she looked at everyone and said, "Money is not a problem. I can solve it. This money is everyone's salary. Keep it well. I will go and bring them back tomorrow." Everyone looked at Vicky and hesitated for a moment, but they still put the money away. Leader would never lie to them. This was something that everyone knew. Since she said it was okay, then it must be okay. "I will go and buy some blankets for them tomorrow. Little Seven is afraid of the cold. I will go and buy some flowery clothes for Little Seven. The little girl loves to be beautiful. She has been crying in her dreams many times. Little Four's clothes are also ragged. I will go and buy a big jacket for him tomorrow. If everyone comes back, then we can perform in other operas. The audience will like it better if we perform in other operas." Everyone was talking at the same time, and they were already looking forward to a new life. Vicky smiled. Suddenly, she was very grateful for the choice that Mr. Hades gave her today, which gave her the confidence to bring her members back. Chapter 2219. How is this possible? In the editorial department of Whole Foods Media, Ho Catalan stared at the 2 identical picture albums in his hands in shock. This was sent back from Chaos City by Garland's fastest flying steed. As the boss of Whole Foods Media, Ho Catalan was also one of the picture book lovers. Garland did not send him a gift to cater to his tastes. After all, he knew that what he liked was not such a proper picture book. Ho Catalan, who had a bookshelf full of colorful picture books at home, was not surprised by how beautifully the story of The Little Mermaid was drawn but that the two picture books were exactly the same. This was a colorful picture book. According to Garland, there were 1,000 copies of the same picture book in Chaos City, and they were sold in limited quantities at Mamie's, priced at 1,000 copper coins. What did this mean? Most people would think about how to buy a few more copies and then resell them at another place to make a profit. From Hocatalin's professional perspective, this picture book could be sold for 50,000 to 80,000 copper coins in Rhoda's current color market. The picture style was exquisite, and the story was interesting. It should be loved by many rich ladies. If he bought it for 1,000 copper coins, he could easily make 100,000 copper coins before the news spread to Rhodu. Garland had asked him to help sell it. Of course, that was not all. 1,000 copies of the same picture book meant that someone in Chaos City had solved the problem of color printing. This was undoubtedly disruptive news to the print media. Imagine if Whole Foods Media added color illustrations to their magazines. What kind of impact would it have on the gourmet magazine market? If this cost could be reduced and the price could be controlled, the increment of Whole Foods Media's magazines would be unimaginable. Hocatalin's breathing became heavier at the thought of this, because Garland had sent back a piece of bad news at the same time. Meg had rejected the exclusive collaboration with Whole Foods Media and had signed with 10 gourmet magazines at the same time. This meant that Whole Foods Media's exclusive advantage had been lost, and the $1 million miracle in the previous issue could not be continued. But if they could get the wealth password of color printing, other than gourmet magazines, at this moment he had already thought of countless industries that would usher in a drastic change, and there were countless opportunities hidden in them. Not to mention anything else. Even if he took out a part of those exquisite picture books from his collection and deleted some of the scenes that were not suitable for dissemination, it would be enough to shake up the picture book industry and make a lot of money. The good news was that this batch of picture books came from Mr. Meg, and the picture books were drawn by his daughter. The bad news was that Mr. Meg was clearly not an honest person who would easily fool others. He sold 1,000 copies of the picture book that cost 1,000 copper coins each in one day and easily obtained 1,000,000 copper coins. How Keto wasn't sure if he had the ability to make such a person share his wealth password. Hocatalin walked to the door of his office and said to his secretary, "Book me a ticket to Chaos City tomorrow. I want the fastest flying steed." "Okay, boss." "Interesting. How did Mr. Meg do it?" He had actually managed to break through a problem that had not been solved for so many years, and he had even managed to do it so exquisitely. Was it magic? It doesn't look like it either. Buffett Manor. Hill sat comfortably on the sofa with her legs crossed. She looked at the picture book in her hands and clicked her tongue in wonder. It was a rare break, and the picture book was given to her by her subordinates. It came from Amy's and was made by Anne. The story was very interesting, and the drawings were very exquisite. The comfortable colors and drawing style allowed her to enjoy half an hour of pleasure. However, what interested her the most was the picture book itself. It was a color picture book, and it was a mass-produced color picture book with figures. This thing had never appeared in the market before. The reason was very simple. Until now, no one had been able to print a picture book in color. It was not that no one had tried, but most of them were very rough, and the colors were limited, so the combination was very ugly. It was better to use black and white to leave some room for imagination. Someone once said that if anyone could solve the color printing problem, they would have a next wealth password in the paper industry. Now, this person had appeared. Hill stroked the picture book, and the corners of her lips curled up slightly. As expected, Mr. Meg had never disappointed her. From a steam locomotive to the color printing now, it was easier to accept with some foreshadowing. The Buffett family did not dabble much in the paper industry, but everyone knew the importance of a widely distributed media. It was the same for the Buffett family. Now, she smelled the scent of a revolution in this industry. The new rich would appear very soon, and this time, she might have the opportunity to set up a plan in advance. I wonder if Mr. Meg is going to do it himself this time, or sell the technology like before. Hill pondered for a while before turning to the door and saying, "I want to see the information of the best media people on the Norland continent tomorrow morning." "Yes, young mistress." The secretary's respectful voice came from outside. "Quick, Send this back to Rodu and get Old Fong to print 10,000 copies. In a guest room in the north of Chaos City, a middle-aged man handed a picture book wrapped in a few layers of cloth to a young man. The young man frowned and said, "Father, this isn't a good idea. What do you know? We built our business on this. What's wrong with that? Even if we don't print it, others will. When it's everywhere in the market, what are you going to print?" The middle-aged man jumped up and smacked the young man's head with a look of exasperation. But if we print 10,000 copies directly, what if we can't sell them? This isn't some restricted product that can't be bought in the market. The young man covered his head with an aggrieved expression. The middle-aged man rolled his eyes and said, "What do you know? This is the red braised pork recipe drawn by the daughter of the owner of Mamie's. Do you know how many copies of Mr. Max eggplant with garlic sauce were sold in the last issue of the Whole Food Mart last time? 1,000,000 copies. You idiot. Not to mention 10,000 copies. I reckon we have to print a few more times." But your mother. Hurry up and crawl." The middle-aged man kicked him. The young man went out dejectedly and did not dare to say anything else. Meg still did not know that the story of the Little Mermaid had attracted so much attention, but he had already started to plan how to sell Miss Black Cat better. This time, he planned to release it in Rodu. If he were to set the price, it would be 2,000 copper coins per copy. The price was twice as high as The Little Mermaid's, but the number of pages in this album was more than twice as high. Moreover, Annie's painting style had been honed for a period of time, and the way she presented it in Miss Black Cat was far beyond The Little Mermaid's. Moreover, his target audience was those rich and nobles who had money, leisure, and some appreciation. They were the opera house's target audience. Chapter 22:20. When night fell, Meg and Effie said their goodbyes and passed the keys to her. They considered it as entrusting Saipan Tavern to her. The family went back to Chaos City under the cover of the night. "Young mistress, you will be the boss of the 2 best taverns in Rodu from now on. You're awesome," Mara said to Effie with admiration. Luckily, Master chose young mistress in the end. Otherwise, she wouldn't know how to be a boss. "I will be even busier in the future. My leisurely life will be long gone." Effie sighed. He's comfortable now. His wife and children can warm him up. It won't be too late to wake up late. "It's all right, young mistress. I will do my best to help," Mara said eagerly. "All right. Then from tomorrow onwards, you will practice 100 portions of pig's ear salad day. They will be sold at our Titan Tavern." Mara was stunned. "Didn't Master say that we can't sell imperfect pig's ears?" This is actually relative. To Saipan Tavern, perfect pig's ears are the most suitable dish for the customers. Effie shook her head with a smile. "But to Titan Tavern, even an imperfect pig's ear salad is enough to crush the dishes we provide now. Then it will be perfect." "I see. But—" Mara was deep in thought. "Your master wants you to practice 1,000 portions before you can graduate. Do you know how many pigs have to sacrifice their lives for 1,000 pig's ears? If you don't sell them, are you going to eat 1,000 portions of pig's ears alone?" Effie said with a roll of her eyes. "I will," Mara said resolutely. She didn't want to eat 1,000 portions of pig's ears. Just thinking about it scared her. However, she still asked curiously, "Young mistress, how many pigs have to sacrifice their lives?" "Idiot. Of course it's 1,000. Mamie's was open for business for a day and closed for another day, making the customers extremely resentful. Fortunately, it was a day off according to the rules. Instead, it was the next morning, and there was already a long line outside the restaurant. Most people came for breakfast, and a small portion came for the Little Mermaid sketchbook. Meg woke up early and wrote a small blackboard to hang on the door. Once he opened the door, he saw pairs of resentful eyes in the dark. So early. Meg was a little surprised. He hung the small blackboard on the door, took a step back, and stood in the warm range of the heater. He smiled and said, "It's cold, right?" "Cold. Cold." Harrison, who was standing in the front row, said with chattering teeth, "It's okay. Just bear with it for a while, and it'll be over. Compared to this, the restaurant is really warm." Meg smiled and then closed the door. All the guests, Not long after, the door of the restaurant opened again. Meg walked out with a huge vat and 2 stacks of disposable cups. He looked at Harrison and smiled. Come on, I'll leave the task of distributing the ginger soup to everyone to you. Warm up before eating. This is the first time Mr. Mack has warmed me up. Harrison looked surprised. The customers were also curious about what was in the steaming vat. Meg handed a big spoon to Harrison and patted him on the shoulder. I'll leave it to you. I promise I'll complete the task. Harrison smiled. Mag closed the door and went back into the restaurant. Harrison called out to the 2 young men, and they scooped a small cup of steaming red ginger soup for everyone. Then they distributed it to everyone. The steaming ginger soup was placed in a paper cup, and it was warm in the hands. Their hands, which had been frozen for a long time, regained feeling. It smells so good. Is it sugar? A little girl held the cup with both hands and sniffed it gently. She was very curious. Maybe Mr. Mack added sweet sugar in it, the little girl's father said with a smile. He blew on the steam and took a sip. The ginger soup was slightly sweet and spicy, but it didn't feel very spicy in the mouth. Instead, it felt very warm. It swirled in the mouth and then slid down the throat into the stomach. The warm feeling extended from the throat all the way to the stomach. Then, as if a glowing ball of fire was stuffed into the stomach, the body suddenly felt very warm. Delicious! The man's eyes lit up, and he took 2 more sips. He finished the small cup of ginger soup very quickly. Small beads of sweat appeared on his nose and forehead. He felt his whole body warming up, and it was from the inside out and from the top to the bottom. The chill of early spring was completely dispelled, and he felt very comfortable. Gulp, gulp, the sound of drinking soup sounded one after another. Everyone had the same experience. After drinking a cup of ginger soup, their whole body warmed up and the cold wasn't too hard to bear. It's so hot. I feel like this cup of soup is about the same as sitting in the restaurant. As expected of Mr. Mack, he can make the ginger soup so delicious. I suddenly feel a little touched. Mr. Mack is indeed a good boss. Everyone was talking at once, and they were all amazed by the miracle of the ginger soup. The little girl finished the ginger soup in small sips and looked up at the man. It's so delicious. Can I have another cup? This. The man looked at Harrison, who was in front of him, hesitantly. Harrison, who had poured the ginger soup for hundreds of people, was so tired that his hands were no longer his own. He scooped the last bit of ginger soup from the bottom of the pot into a cup and was about to taste it when he heard the little girl's words. He looked at the cup in his hand and then at the little girl. He smiled and handed the cup in his hand that he hadn't drunk yet. Here, little girl, this cup is for you too. The little girl didn't reach out to take it. Instead, she looked at Harrison and asked, Uncle, do you not have any left for yourself? It's okay. Uncle is full from smelling it just now. It's still warm now, Harrison said with a smile. The little girl looked up at her father and seemed to be asking for his opinion. Drink it yourself. She's been working so hard for so long. She's had 1 cup. It's enough, the man quickly said as he patted the little girl's head with a smile. It's right for little kids to drink more. You won't get sick when you're warm. Harrison smiled and stuffed the cup into the little girl's hand, and then returned to his seat. Thank you, Uncle. The little girl smiled sweetly. You're welcome. Harrison waved his hand. The cold morning of early spring was warmed by a small cup of ginger soup. The hearts of the foodies were stirred by the little blackboard hanging on the door. Today's new dish, noodles, steamed wontons in chili oil, spicy. New dish, spicy chicken. After introducing shaved noodles and soup dumplings the day before yesterday, Mr. Mack introduced 2 new dishes today. Wow, Mr. Mack is so productive. Harrison couldn't help but exclaim. This is the victory of the hardcore breakfast party. From today onwards, we can finally eat hardcore food in the morning. Some people were overjoyed when they saw the steamed wontons in chili oil. Chapter 22-21. The best way to appease customers' grievances was to let them eat to their heart's content and let them enjoy the experience of lining up for a meal that was worth their money. This was something that Mag was very clear about, and he was also working hard to achieve it. The appearance of the red oil wontons had indeed added new options to the breakfast menu. Meg's breakfast preferences were related to his mood. Sometimes he wanted to eat something light, and other times he wanted to eat something heavy. It would be best if there was a choice. Yabamiya came early in the morning. She looked at Meg with admiration as soon as she entered the restaurant. "2 new dishes today. Boss, you're amazing." As a woman who had no talent in cooking, Yabamiya admired Meg's ability to continuously create delicious new dishes. It was as if his mind was filled with many delicacies, and he could easily create one dish after another that would make people gasp in amazement. "I have to give the customer something new, right?" Meg said as he pinched the wontons. "This doesn't look too difficult. Do you need my help?" Yabamiya looked at him for a while and asked eagerly. Meg glanced at her and nodded. "You can give it a try if you want to." "Okay." Yabamiya washed her hands and dried them. Then she copied Meg and pinched a small piece of dough and pressed it with a rolling pin. A large piece of wafer lay quietly on the chopping board. Yabamiya pinched the wafer for a while before she finally removed the wafer from the chopping board. She looked a little embarrassed. She didn't expect that the seemingly simple process of crushing the wafer would be so difficult for her. "Just use the wontons that I pressed," Meg said with a smile as he gestured at the thin stack of wontons next to him. The wontons were thin, and one could feel their tenacity when they held them in their hands. However, they were thin and transparent when they were exposed to light. Yabamiya copied Meg and scooped a spoonful of meat into the middle of the wafer. After thinking for a while, she folded the wafer in half and pinched it tightly. Then, she pinched the wafer with her fingers. Yabamiya looked at the wontons in her hands and nodded with satisfaction. It didn't seem as difficult as she thought. Meg looked at the wontons in her hands and said calmly, "The wontons you made will fall apart before they even enter the water." "Really?" Yabamiya was stunned. She looked at the wontons she made and then looked at Meg's wontons. She didn't feel much difference. "For this bag of yours, first pinch the corners together and then slowly pinch them together along the sides. One by one, it will look more beautiful, and at the same time, it won't be exposed during the cooking process, which will affect the taste and appearance." Meg demonstrated and taught at the same time. "I got it." Yabamiya nodded as if she understood. She followed suit and made a wonton, but she squeezed out half of the meat filling. "You're a failure." Meg laughed, but still encouraged her. "You'll get it after a few more tries." Not long after, Phyllis came and joined the team of wontons. Phyllis was much more talented than Yabamiya. After a short while, she made the wontons quite well. Yabamiya sighed. Meg wrapped up the wontons and put away Yabamiya's and Phyllis's wontons. They had these wontons for breakfast this morning. Phyllis and Yabamiya, who had made the wontons themselves, asked for the wontons in chili oil. Shirley and the rest chose a light breakfast. Shaved noodles and soup dumplings became everyone's new favorites. Meg cooked 4 bowls of wontons in chili oil. When Amy saw the wontons wrapped up in chili oil when she woke up, she asked for a bowl. He also wanted to eat something spicy to wake up this morning. The braised hands floated in the red soup, dotted with sesame seeds and sprinkled with fresh spring onions. Steam rose from the braised hands, bringing with it the aroma of the chicken soup and the spiciness of the chili oil. It made people feel refreshed just by smelling it. Gulp, it smells so good. Anna swallowed her saliva. She felt that her noodles didn't seem so tempting anymore. Everyone couldn't help but take a few more glances. Although the food they had in the morning was a little too spicy, they still couldn't help but want to try it. "I made this. It does look a little loose." Yabamiya looked at the bowl of wontons in chili oil in front of her. She picked up a wonton with a crooked mouth. The corner was slightly open, but fortunately, the meat filling didn't escape. She blew on the wontons and took a bite. The wontons were tender and tasty. The skin was thin and smooth, and the juicy meat was rich. The combination of the spiciness and juicy meat made her taste buds go crazy. She only needed to chew a little before swallowing it down. Only then did the spiciness blossom in her mouth. It flowed down her throat and warmed her stomach. This feeling was simply too wonderful. After swallowing the wontons, Yabamiya exclaimed, "It's so delicious." Yes, yes, it's too delicious. Although it's a little spicy, it's really tender and smooth. Phyllis's eyes were glistening with tears as she nodded. As an elf who didn't eat spicy food and only ate clear soup and hot pot, this spiciness was still a little too much for her. However, this didn't affect her love for this wonton. Unlike the soup dumplings, which had the feeling of drinking soup before eating meat, this wonton with the chili oil soup made the wontons even wilder. In addition to the crispy and spicy chili oil, the soup base was chicken soup. The fresh and sweet chicken soup made the wontons taste even better. This soup has to be drunk like this. Amy held a spoon and gently peeled off the chili oil on the surface of the soup. Then, she scooped up a spoonful of soup and put it into her mouth. Everyone felt their throats tighten as they secretly guessed how spicy the wontons would feel. However, Amy looked like she was enjoying it. She drank a few mouthfuls of soup before starting to eat the wontons. After a while, small beads of sweat appeared on her small nose. She looked like she was eating very happily. Meg also started to eat. The taste was pretty good, but the wontons were a little lacking. After all, they were made by Phyllis and Yabamiya, so they weren't as finished. However, they were eating it for themselves, so it wasn't a problem to eat it casually. It wasn't good to waste ingredients. The wontons for the customers were all made by himself. The taste was absolutely delicious. As for the spicy chicken, this was a dish that would only be released at noon. Whether it went well with rice or wine, it was a good dish. Meg hadn't made it for everyone yet, so he was looking forward to it. The morning business hours hadn't even started yet, and the two elven girls were dragging out the Little Mermaid sketchbook that they were going to sell today. As Amy's side business, selling sketchbooks was indeed a good business. After all, it wasn't easy to find a business that could easily make millions in a day elsewhere. Chapter 22:22. At the back of the line, the secretary looked at Hill, who was wearing a red down jacket, and said, "Miss, there are quite a lot of people in the queue. Why don't I line up here and buy it for you? If you buy it here, you might not be able to have your breakfast until the end of business." "That's just right." Hill smiled. The secretary wanted to say something, but stopped herself. She tactfully kept her question to herself. "So Mamie's breakfast is also so lively. Mr. Meg indeed has an irresistible charm." Hill looked at the long line in front of her, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. For some reason, she had become more and more curious about Meg these days. Whether it was his superb culinary skills, his amazing inventions, or his unique ability to dabble in different industries. He could cook in the kitchen, work in the hall, tailor clothes, and build trains and cannons. Such a man was willing to spend a lot of time in the kitchen every day just to serve delicious food to his customers. Hill had never seen such a person before. Even in the history of the Norland continent, there had never been such a strange man. The more she interacted with him, the more she felt that he was unfathomable, as if he was hiding a huge secret. But the more it was so, the more curious she was, and she wanted to explore it. There had never been a man who made her feel this way. For Hill, who had devoted the past 18 years of her life to business, this was a little strange. Of course, she didn't think she would be easily moved by a man. But if this person was Meg, she was still willing to try to observe her inner feelings. After all, whether it was the steam engine or the color printer that could be made by him, they were all creations that could change the world. It was not surprising that such an outstanding man, who could cook well, could move any woman's heart. The restaurant was open for business, and the two young elves at the door were already selling picture books of The Little Mermaid. The exquisite picture books were loved by everyone, and there were many people who came specially to buy picture books. However, according to the rules, the picture books were given priority to the customers in the line, and there was a limit of 2 copies. To a certain extent, this discouraged the scalpers who were trying to get rich. Hill walked to the entrance of the restaurant and looked at the portrait of and on the signboard. After thinking for a while, he took out some money and bought a picture book. She already had one at home. She had bought this book to show her support. The thought was worth more than the price. The new product on the blackboard caught her attention. It was wonton and chili oil, and it sounded a little festive. However, many of the dishes at Mamie's were new to her. She had a lot of daily chores, so she didn't have much time to line up for a meal. It would be great if I could become the lady boss of Mamie's. Not only would I not have to line up every day, but I would also be able to eat tofu pudding, which is good for my skin. I would be able to lie down and collect money every day. Mr. Mack is also so handsome, a girl behind said faintly as she gently massaged her slightly numb legs. The Hill tilted her head and thought for a while with her smart brain. It sounds like a good investment. This girl probably didn't know that Mr. Mack didn't just own a restaurant. He also owned half of the rights to the steam engine and 10% of the rights to all the railways on the Northern continent that were to be developed in the future. That would be a terrifying amount of wealth. Apart from that, he could also lead the print industry to a new era of color printing and revolutionize an industry that was full of imagination. In this aspect, the ladies in Chaos City did have a good eye. After all, the ideal husband in the hearts of so many girls was not only a chef and restaurant owner, but also an invisible business tycoon. The Hill and the secretary sat down at an empty table in the corner. It was already 8:40 a.m., and it was close to the restaurant's closing time. It was also the working hours for most of the workers, so there were many empty tables in the restaurant. "Hello, what would you like to eat?" Yabamiya came to the table. Although she had been busy the whole morning, she still had a smile on her face. "I'd like a wonton in chili oil," the Hill said to Yabamiya with a smile. "That's spicy," Mia reminded her. After all, they had eaten together before, so they weren't so distant. "It's okay. It's a little cold outside, so it's just right to eat something spicy. It shouldn't be as spicy as hot pot, right?" "Not really. After all, hot pot is not suitable to eat in the morning." Yabamiya shook her head with a smile. She took down the soup dumplings that the secretary ordered and turned to walk to the kitchen, her blonde ponytail swaying behind her. The Hill looked around the restaurant. Amy must have gone to school because she was nowhere to be seen. Only that fat, round orange cat was lying on the counter, one of its hands hanging outside and squinting lazily. Barbara was sitting on a high stool behind the counter. Her fingers were pointing at the restaurant from time to time, and a breakfast would fly out of the restaurant and land in front of the customer. The Hill had a deep impression of this princess from the Moon Nation. With her status, she had already connected the teleportation portal from the Moon Nation to the Northern continent, and was deeply involved in the construction of the spell formation to seal the devil twice. After making a great contribution, she still stayed at Mamie's as a waitress. This really surprised her. There was also Gina, that mermaid who was as gentle as water, the princess of the Lantis tribe, who could stop crying children in a second. She also continued to stay at Mamie's. The Hill looked at Meg, who was busy in the kitchen. That upright figure and that handsome side profile were always hard to ignore. What were they after? Could it be that it's really just his dishes? The Hill frowned slightly as she pondered. As a businesswoman, she would always calculate her gains and losses carefully. Hence, after thinking seriously for a long time, she came to the conclusion that they were after his body. "Hello, here's your wonton in chili oil." A voice rang out beside her ear, and a wonton in chili oil landed steadily in front of her. The red soup didn't even tremble at all. The Hill collected her thoughts and glanced at Barbara, who was smiling at her from behind the counter. She returned a smile before looking at the wonton in front of her. Red soup, white wonton, fresh green onions sprinkled on the surface, and bits of cooked sesame sprinkled on the soup noodles. The aroma of the chicken soup couldn't wait to enter her nose. After waking up early in the morning and waiting in line for 2 hours, Hill's stomach grumbled as he smelled the aroma of the food. Although the bright red chili oil made her throat tighten, it didn't feel too oily. She picked up a spoon and used her chopsticks to pick up a wonton. She could see the wonton that was pinched together like a lace. It was exquisite and cute. Chapter 22-23. The thin and moist skin was gently bitten open and the juicy meat filling spread out in her mouth. The slightly spicy soup blossomed in her mouth and intertwined with the fragrance of the meat. Gil felt as if she had fallen onto a soft quilt, then was instantly shaken into a firm and warm embrace. A warm feeling slid down her throat all the way to her stomach, then spread to her limbs and bones. She tried her best to suppress the delicious taste that made her tremble all over, and then carefully savored it. After eating one wonton, there was a trace of sweat on the tip of Hill's nose. "It's so delicious." Hill looked at the wonton in front of her, and her eyes lit up. Because she was busy with work, she was not very particular about eating. It was common for her to be too busy to eat. Breakfast was even more dependent on her mood. However, this breakfast, which seemed a little heavy at first glance, captured her heart in an instant. That kind of wonderful feeling made her feel as if her mood today had become brighter. She could even understand why people queued up for so long. Although the long queuing time consumed a lot of physical and mental strength, when you tasted a delicious and warm breakfast, that kind of tiredness would be doubled by a sense of satisfaction. Moreover, it would give you a stronger motivation and mental strength. This was probably the magical power of delicious food. How could a small wonton be enough? She ate one after another. From time to time, she would use a spoon to stir the red soup on the surface and drink a spoonful of chicken soup. Not long after, a bowl of red oil wonton was down her stomach. If it wasn't for the red soup being so spicy and oily, she might not even have left the soup base. Phew! Hill gently exhaled and revealed a satisfied smile. Delicious and comfortable. She hadn't eaten this kind of breakfast in a long time. She took out a silk handkerchief and gently wiped the sweat from her forehead and nose. Her gaze fell on Meg, who was tidying up the kitchen utensils in the kitchen. If she wanted to eat this kind of breakfast every day, she had to wake up at 6 o'clock. After a simple wash, she had to take a carriage and spend 20 minutes to arrive at Mamie's. Then she had to queue for 2 hours to enter the restaurant and order a wonton in red oil. After eating, she had to take a carriage and spend 20 minutes to go to the bank. This meant that she would have to spend almost 3 hours just for breakfast. Furthermore, she wouldn't be able to eat the tofu pudding at this time. Although she was very confident in her appearance, she was at the age when her skin and body were in the best condition. However, if she could have a bowl of tofu pudding every morning, it would make all of her skin problems disappear. That was something that no woman would refuse. And this was only for breakfast. If they wanted to eat lunch and dinner, the queue and mealtime might increase. Mr. Mack was a man of principle. He would never let anyone in. Money could solve many problems, but it couldn't solve Mr. Mack's problem because he was also very rich. Currently, other than the employees of Mamie's, even the city lord, Michael, had to line up obediently for a meal. It was impossible for her to be a waitress. After all, she still had her own ambitions and dreams. Therefore, if she wanted to go downstairs and have a delicious breakfast every morning without having to line up or wait, it seemed like she could only become the lady boss of Mamie's. Now that I think about it, it seems like it's really worth it. No wonder so many ladies want to be the lady boss. Hill's eyes were burning as she stared at Meg. Her smart brain started to calculate the benefits of this matter. Meg, who had taken off his apron and hung it at the side, felt a burning gaze on him. He looked up and happened to meet Hill's eyes. "Oh, Mr. Hill. Oh, this big banker actually came for breakfast." Meg was a little surprised. Hill's expression was a little awkward. A blush flashed across her face, but she quickly changed it into a qualified banker's smile. Meg picked up the thermos on the counter at the side, took a sip of goji berry water, and closed the lid. He looked at Hill and said, "Miss Hill, what brings you here for breakfast today? Because this place has the best breakfast in Chaos City. Do I have a choice?" Hill replied with a smile. "That sounds reasonable." Meg smiled. He didn't think Hill would spend a few hours just to have breakfast. Other than breakfast, I actually have something to discuss with Mr. Meg. Hill didn't beat around the bush. The restaurant's morning operating hours were about to end, and most of the customers had already left. "Then let's have a cup of tea together later." Meg nodded. After all, Hill was an excellent business partner. She controlled the biggest tycoon on the Norland continent. She was a real rich lady. It would be good to make her happier. All right. Hill nodded and signaled her secretary to settle the bill and leave. The restaurant closed at 9 a.m. sharp. After Mia and the others were done with the cleaning, they quickly left. Meg brewed a pot of chrysanthemum tea and sat down with Hill at the table in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. Hill took off her down jacket and wore a long black knitted dress. The fitting cut and design outlined her figure perfectly. Beside her was the book The Story of the Little Mermaid that she bought in the morning. Thank you. Hill received the tea that Meg poured for her. She took a whiff of the fragrant chrysanthemum tea and put down the teacup with a smile. I heard that the railway to Vic Mountain has been very busy recently. Has it already entered into normal operation? Meg asked casually as he poured himself a cup of tea. Yes. We had to transport ores and other urgent items from Vic Mountain to Chaos City previously, and that made this section of the railway run at full capacity. Many problems were exposed, but many problems were also solved. Now, the operation has become normal, and the capacity is very good. Hill nodded. We are preparing for the railway from Chaos City to the Dwarves. Once it's open, the trade between the three regions will experience a qualitative leap. This route is indeed not bad. Meg nodded. Vic Mountain produced all kinds of ores, and the goblins were not good at forging. Relying on the railway's large-scale transport capacity, the ores from Vic Mountain would be transported to the dwarves for processing and forging, and then the processed products would be sent to Chaos City to be sold. This formed a closed loop. The most important thing was that these two races were not very powerful and did not have a strong desire to fight for supremacy. Thus, they were easier targets for integration. Once the economy was deeply tied and communication became more convenient, the integration of the goblins and dwarves into Chaos City was something to look forward to. This was also one of Meg's ideas back then. However, he didn't expect Hill and the City Lord Castle to make use of the Northern Expedition this time to facilitate this so quickly. When the railway started to spread across the Northern continent, the convenience and economy of the running steam locomotives would definitely attract the other races to join in. The communication across the entire continent would increase rapidly with the convenience of transportation. However, I'm not here to talk about the railway today. I want to talk about this picture book. Hill picked up the picture book of The Little Mermaid and looked at Meg with a smile. Chapter 22-24. Meg looked at the picture book in Hill's hands and smiled. Anne's work. It's very well drawn. I like it very much. Yes, it's one of the best young girl picture books I've ever seen. Whether it's the style or the story, Anne's talent in drawing is amazing. The Hill nodded with a smile and changed the topic. However, I'm more curious about the reproduction method of this picture book. He went straight to the point. She still liked this way of talking. You're interested? Meg looked at the Hill. Yes, it's just like the steam engine. It's hard not to be interested. The Hill nodded with certainty. After all, it's a big deal that can change an industry, and it's always important to have the right to speak. Meg smiled and looked at the Hill with admiration. A small picture book could be resold by clever people to make a small profit. Those in the industry might be able to feel the opportunity, but the Hill saw the opportunity to fight for the right to speak. He was an old capitalist handed down from his ancestors. The appearance of color printing was a blow to the current paper media on the Northern continent. It was a very simple analogy. If anyone could produce a full-color magazine now, whether it was a geography magazine that introduced the customs of various places, a Playboy with a seductive succubus on the cover, or even a gourmet magazine, they could easily occupy a huge market. Moreover, the other magazine publishers couldn't fight back. Color was so magical. This was also the reason why people on Earth kept pursuing resolution. The profit of the magazine itself wasn't so important. As long as the sales reached a certain level, it could become a channel with wide influence. Whether it was an advertisement or a declaration of a certain idea, it was a very powerful voice channel. Now, most of the resources were distributed, but the appearance of color printing and the exclusivity for a period of time was very likely to change this situation. It was a pity that Meg only had a nuclear printer in his hands. Although the printing speed should be able to keep up with the ambitions of the Hill, it was very difficult for him to explain how such a high-level thing was made. He only provided a blueprint for the steam engine, and the Hill used his money to build a strong team of siege lions. Finally, they overcame many difficulties and created it. But nuclear power, even if he had a brain from Earth, it was not enough. As for color printing, he had to sort out the knowledge in his mind and figure out how to make a printing machine that was not that exaggerated, but was still usable. The Hill looked at Meg and said seriously, "I don't know if I'll be lucky enough to work with Mr. Meg again this time. I think with our familiar cooperation, we should be able to do this very well. Actually, so far, this is just an immature idea. The output is only enough to produce 1,000 picture books a day." Meg shook his head. The Hill said thoughtfully, "Are you planning to do it yourself this time?" "So far, yes." Meg nodded and said indifferently, "You also know that I don't have much ambition. In the beginning, I just wanted to let the children's works have color and let more people appreciate them." "Freak. Shameless." "Hutue," the system complained. The Hill was stunned. She opened her mouth slightly and looked at Meg in disbelief. She did not expect that the purpose of solving this problem that had troubled the world for so many years was just to let the children's works have color when they were spread. He's really a good man. The Hill could not help but think in her heart. She felt that Meg's image in her heart had improved. He could cook, he was wise, considerate, and cared about his family. He was indeed a good man, a good father. Right, other than being the boss's wife, being his daughter seemed like a good idea too. She had to call him father. The Hill blushed and drove away the strange thoughts in her mind. She looked at Meg and said, "If that's the case, then I'll wait for Mr. Meg to make this technology more widely available before we work together. I hope you can think of me at that time. I'm willing to provide all of Mr. Meg's needs." "Okay." Meg nodded. In terms of wealth, no one could compare to the Hill. Moreover, as a businessman, working with the Hill was more reassuring than working with a certain force or race. As long as the distribution of benefits was reasonable enough, the cooperation would be very stable. There was no need to worry about the details. The Hill took a sip of tea. The faint fragrance of chrysanthemum lingered in her mouth, refreshing and warm. Putting down the teacup, the Hill flipped her hair and pretended to be casual. "Mr. Meg has never mentioned anything about the boss's wife." As soon as the words left her mouth, the Hill blushed. She glanced at Meg from the corner of her eyes, and her heart began to beat wildly. How could she ask that? Meg was slightly stunned. He looked at the Hill with a slightly strange expression. Speaking of which, the relationship between them did not seem to have reached the level of discussing personal matters. Moreover, why did she suddenly ask about the boss's wife? Why was she blushing? Could it be she wants to get my printing press for free? The boss's wife is not too worried. I heard that the line has already stretched to the city gate. Meg smiled. He looked at the Hill with a slightly wary gaze. "Miss Hill, do you have someone in mind?" It would be fine if she did. If not, then he would have to be careful. Wuji's mother was right. Beautiful women were all liars. The Hill blushed a little under Meg's stare. But what did he mean by that question? Everyone knew that she, the Hill Buffett, was as beautiful as a fairy. She was talented and beautiful. There was no man in Chaos City who was worthy of her, let alone a man who could catch her eye. Of course, that was in the past. Today, she suddenly felt that Meg was not bad either. Although he was a little older than her, he looked more mature. He maintained his figure very well. She could vaguely see his straight figure under his shirt. His slender fingers were very beautiful. Even though he had just finished working in the kitchen, he did not seem to be greasy at all. So, was he testing to see if there was a chance? Those who have me in mind can probably line up all the way to the city gate. It's a pity that I don't like anyone, the Hill said calmly. Meg raised his eyebrows. He had met a kindred spirit. He was already at the city gate, but she was already outside. However, as the richest single woman in Chaos City, the Hill, who was rich, beautiful, and had a figure, was definitely the target of many men. Big sister, I don't want to work hard anymore. Meg felt that if he shouted that out now, he might be on the path to living off a woman. Of course, the biggest risk of this path was not in bed. It was that he might be killed by Rena halfway. Besides, Meg did not think that this intelligent business tycoon would really be charmed by a chef like him. This kind of story only happened in children's fairy tales. So, she wanted to get the printer for free. I refuse, Meg blurted out. Chapter 22-25. The atmosphere suddenly became quiet. The Hill and Meg looked at each other. Although they remained calm and collected, the atmosphere gradually became awkward. I'm sorry. I suddenly thought of a question, so I accidentally blurted it out. You know, smart people like us would usually think of few things at the same time, Mag explained seriously. I know. The Hill smiled and nodded. I actually know how to do that too. Ha ha. I knew we were the same kind of people. Then I will go back first. Okay, I will send you back. Come back for dinner when you are free. Meg stood up. It would be best if we don't have to queue. The Hill said faintly. Queuing is too extravagant for me. I will definitely call you the next time we have a meal together. Meg smiled and nodded. This was a few million people. Queuing for a few hours for a meal was indeed too extravagant. The Hill came out of the restaurant, wrapped her down jacket tightly, and quickly boarded the carriage. Only then did she let out a long sigh and used her small hand to fan her slightly hot cheeks. Thinking of the conversation with Meg just now, she couldn't help but laugh. But what is he rejecting? What was he thinking just now? The Hill held her chin and couldn't help but think curiously. Miss, are we going to the bank now? The secretary asked. Yes. The Hill responded, and the carriage slowly drove away from Amy's. Meg sat by the window and watched the Hill's carriage go away. He took a sip of tea, but his thoughts had already drifted away. The little girl's vague teasing was no longer enough to make an uncle like him restless. Let's talk about something more practical. He had a beautiful wife at home, so he didn't dare to act rashly. He had already achieved the freedom of wealth. Regardless of whether it was the few $100 million that he stole from Dragon Island, the investment in the textile factory, the brewery half a street on Romo Street, the Saipan Tavern, or the Manna Hot Pot restaurant with Rena, even if he ate king crabs every day, it would still be an inexhaustible wealth. However, since his previous life, money was just a number to him, an inexhaustible number. Therefore, he wasn't too obsessed with it. Instead, he had more expectations about how to make his heart rich and happy, and how to make his family and friends happy. The world had not changed for the better. They had fought for 100 years of peace, but this was still a world with huge racial differences. The hatred did not disappear. After a short honeymoon period, friction would follow. This was a problem that had not been solved on Earth in the 21st century. Naturally, it was impossible to solve it overnight on this barbaric continent. To his relief, there were at least some positive changes. For example, the dwarves, goblins, and Chaos City were quickly establishing ties and connections. Lantist was eliminated and joined the underground city. Connie had complete control over the orc race. At least, it was more promising than Oster's era. The feudal system of the elves was collapsing. Sally might become the new ruler of the elves. Meg had always thought that she was a kind girl. Ever since the giant dragons became transportation dragons, they seemed to have become much more humble. At least, they wouldn't look down on people with their nostrils. The forest trolls were still reclusive. It was indeed difficult for such a huge creature to integrate into another society. However, losing a hot-tempered and ambitious chief should be a good thing for the world. The situation with the demons was more complicated. No powerful race could unify the entire tribe. They were all scattered. Meg had no idea how to develop in the future. Lastly, there was the Roth Empire. Andre had already announced to the world that Sean would be the crown prince. This meant that this huge empire would be handed over to Sean in the future. This was terrible. Meg was not very happy. Therefore, he was thinking whether the throne should be handed over to Vanessa or that little carpenter. The queen was pretty good, too. It was just that Vanessa might not be willing. He was not familiar with the little carpenter, so he had to observe more. The Moon Nation was rather interesting. He would like to take a look if he had the time. Although humans had successfully landed on the moon, they had not settled down. Wouldn't it be great if he could stay there for 3 days and 2 nights? As for the underground city, he hadn't chatted with she for a few days. This ice beauty was too difficult to talk to. She would reply with one word, "Mem." He was also looking forward to that world with a high civilization. However, out of fear of danger, he did not have any plans to enter the underground city recently. That world might have beings that were beyond the 10th tier and technology that was more advanced than the system. He was even a little worried that his system would be discovered after entering that world and capture him for dissection. This system is very advanced, okay? It's just restricted according to the rules of the Norland continent. Host, please don't overthink it. The system said angrily. Advance my foot. Amy's system can reward a nuclear power printer for finding a snail. You're rewarded with a spicy chicken for fighting a great old one? Just tell me, are you spicy chicken? Meg rolled his eyes. This system is the professional. Now that the dungeon and the Moon Nation have appeared, can you reconfigure your authority? We're playing with dimensionality reduction attacks. Now that we're being attacked by someone else, it's very uncomfortable. Meg negotiated. The setting system needs to be rebooted. Then you rebooted. The premise of rebooting is that the host dies and the system returns to the cycle of reincarnation. Are you sure you want to activate the self-destruct program? Stop. Meg quickly stopped this nameless system from doing something stupid. After this system's evaluation, the underground world has no signs of invading the Norland continent. Furthermore, the existence of the Norland continent is not an unknown world to them, but a world that they have abandoned. Therefore, as long as the host does not jump out of line, you won't be too aggrieved. Then let's change our way of thinking. If the underground world can break through the 10th tier shackles, and if I enter the underground city, will I have a chance to become a god physically? Meg asked seriously. This was a question that he had been thinking about recently. The ancients abandoned the Norland continent not because the Norland continent's resources were exhausted and they could not survive. It was more likely that they wanted to seek a higher upper limit. She's battle relied mostly on guns and battleships, but the aura emanating from her was close to 10th tier. Given her age, she might be a genius in the underground world, but it could also be that the environment of the underground city made it convenient for her to cultivate. Theoretically, it's possible, but the risk of the host entering the underground city is uncontrollable. I hope the host can act cautiously, the system said solemnly. Meg ended the conversation with the system, took out the transmitter, and sent a message to she. Braised pork is simmering on a small stove in early spring. It's gurgling and steaming. Just poke it with a chopstick and it'll go through. Do you want to try? After a while, Meg received a reply. Coming. Chapter 22-26. Sometimes women were just so hard to figure out. You wanted to flirt with her, but she was driving an electromagnetic cannon, a super battleship that could blast a 10th tier powerhouse to pieces with one shot. The backseat of a bicycle was obviously not attractive, but if you said she was cold and aloof, a pot of red braised pork could lure her out. Meg got up and walked to the kitchen. He took out a piece of pork belly from the fridge and started to prepare a portion of red braised pork for the incoming guest. He cooked rice for 3 people in the rice cooker. The red braised pork did not go well with the rice, so it was lacking some soul. Moreover, that woman's appetite was not to be underestimated. The red braised pork wrapped in bright red was poured into the crock to simmer. Meg returned to the window, took a book, and nestled comfortably in the chair to read. Ugly Duckling stretched and jumped down from the counter. It walked slowly to Mag's side, jumped onto the chair, and sat comfortably on Mag's lap. Meg glanced at Ugly Duckling, which started to purr, and placed the book in his hand on its head. The height was just right, and one hand was placed on the soft cat cushion. It was quite warm. Meow. Ugly Duckling protested softly. Meg flipped a page and remained unmoved. Not long after, the doorbell rang. Meg got up and opened the door. She was standing outside the door in a silver black bodysuit. Fortunately, she had put away that ridiculously huge sniper rifle. You're quite fast. Meg glanced at his watch. It had only been an hour. He wondered if it was the commute time from the underground city to Chaos City. She's nose twitched as she smelled the fragrance of meat. She then said calmly, "I happen to be doing something nearby." Meg understood what she meant. "I didn't come all the way here just for a portion of red braised pork. Come in." Meg smiled and made way. Everything was easy now that he had asked her out. Meg poured a glass of warm water for she, then went into the kitchen to cut the braised pork and put it on the yellow stove. There were a few pieces of burning charcoal in the stove and a black casserole on the stove. It had just been moved from the stove, and the red braised pork inside was still boiling. The red braised pork was about 2 centimeters square. The thick meat aroma was wrapped in the steam, and she, who had just taken a sip of water, could not help but swallow her saliva. This was too fragrant. When she received Meg's message, she had just come out of the defense building and needed to make a report to the Army. After some serious consideration, she turned down the task of reporting and switched to reporting online. Then, she continued to immerse herself in her job as an observer. She entered the transmigration passageway, came to the Norland continent, and rushed to Chaos City as quickly as possible. This fellow had obviously deceived her. At that time, the braised pork was not stewing on the stove. It should still be stewing in the pot. He thought that he would miss the best time to eat it, but now it seemed that this was the best time to eat it. Meg got a bowl of rice and sprinkled a small plate of chives into the pot. The red was dotted with bits of green, as if it had been injected with soul. There was also a small plate of pickled radish that Meg marinated himself. The red-skinned radish was cut into thin fan-shaped slices with its skin and marinated with millet chili, pepper, rock sugar, Welsh salt, and a little vinegar for a few days. It was the simplest recipe and the most refreshing pickled radish. "Thank you," she said, and did not stand on ceremony. She picked up her chopsticks and put a piece of braised pork in her bowl. She came here for the braised pork, and the only thing that needed to be taken seriously was the braised pork. The fat and tender braised pork was extremely soft. Her chopsticks left a mark on it gently. The bright red color made her feel happy. It was a mixture of fat and lean, and the meat skin had a crystal texture. When she returned to the underground city these few days, she went to the few restaurants that she frequented in the past, but none of the food gave her such a wonderful experience as the braised pork. In the dead of the night, she flipped through the clips of braised pork in the Little Mermaid's book and felt even more hungry. However, she was a reserved person after all. She set up the image of a cold female officer and could not take the initiative to ask Meg for food. However, it was different if he took the initiative to ask. Therefore, she crossed the 2 worlds in less than an hour and came here. She was really craving it. She gently blew on it and put the whole piece of braised pork in her mouth. It was a little hot, but with this bite, the meat juice overflowed in her mouth. It was sweet and soft, fat, but not greasy. The full meatiness, soft and sweet texture made her close her eyes involuntarily. This was a long-lost feeling. The feeling of finally getting what she wanted after thinking about it day and night was too satisfying. Her taste buds were cheering and jumping in joy. In contrast, the status of the restaurants in the underground city had dropped a lot in her heart. They were too bland, and it was difficult to feel surprise and joy. Then, she picked up the rice and took a big bite. The soft rice had a fragrance that swept away the greasy feeling in her mouth. The more she chewed, the sweeter it became. After eating a few pieces of braised pork and half a bowl of rice, she's gaze fell on the small plate of pickled radish. She picked up a piece of radish and smelled the sour taste just as it was about to her mouth. It was not the kind of sour taste, but a slightly aggressive sweet and sour taste that made her salivate unconsciously after smelling it. She tried to take a small bite. The crisp texture and the sweet and sour taste bloomed on the tip of her tongue. It was a refreshing feeling that instantly broke through the remaining greasy taste in her mouth. Then a slightly spicy feeling bloomed. "It's quite delicious." She's eyes lit up, and she put the remaining half of the pickled radish in her mouth. Listening to the crisp sound of chewing, her mood seemed to become brighter. The braised pork was simmered on a small flame, always maintaining the best temperature for eating. She scooped 2 spoonfuls of thick gravy onto the rice and stirred it evenly. Every grain of rice was coated with the gravy of the braised pork. Then, She scooped a spoonful and put it into her mouth. It was the best braised pork soup mixed with rice. The rice soaked in gravy was not only sweet, but also salty and sweet. There was no need for other side dishes, as it was a delicacy in itself. This was also one of She's favorite ways to eat. A pot of braised pork, a pot of rice, and a plate of pickled radish. She ate alone at a leisurely pace. About half an hour later, she finished all of them. This woman is not easy to feed. Meg was secretly speechless. In their family, only Amy could compete with her in terms of appetite. She put the last grain of rice in her mouth and licked the gravy at the corner of her mouth. She put down the chopsticks and bowl, picked up a tissue to wipe the corner of her mouth, and leaned back in the chair in satisfaction. It had been a long time since she had such a comfortable meal. Fortunately, she was busy in the morning and did not have time to eat breakfast. Chapter 22-27. Meg was not in a hurry to clean up the dishes. He stroked the cat with one hand and looked at she calmly. She rarely showed such a relaxed state, but this pot of red braised pork and a big pot of rice seemed to have made her lower her guard, which was more beneficial for their upcoming conversation. "What's the matter?" She looked up at Meg and asked. "Look, some women are so unromantic. You just fed her, and in the blink of an eye, she acts like she doesn't know you. Can I treat you to a meal? After all, we've been through life and death together." Meg smiled. She nodded slightly. "You can call me if you have red braised pork next time." Meg was speechless. How women? Sure enough, she came here for my red braised pork, not me. What about the one in the Mecca last time? Speaking of which, he's a brother who fought together. I should invite him for a meal, Meg said casually. How are you sure that he's a man? She looked at Meg. So it's a girl? Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. What? Is a female army popular in the underground city? Or is the underground city a country of women? The one who drove the battleship to the great old one and self-destructed was also a girl? So be it if she's a girl. It's fine. I don't like to spend time on men. That's not important. She did not answer him directly. Meg nodded and said seriously, It's not important. Even if she's a girl, I plan to treat her to a meal. She's mouth was too hard to pry open, so Meg planned to change it to someone else. He did not believe that everyone in the underground city had the same temper as she. Aren't you worried that you'll be exposed if more people know about your restaurant? She glanced at Meg and asked, Compared to me opening a restaurant here, the existence of the underground city should be a more explosive secret. Meg looked calm and fearless. This secret has been kept very well for tens of thousands of years, she said calmly. The corners of Meg's mouth twitched slightly. This was a blatant threat. It was indeed from a high-level civilization. How's the situation in Lantis now? Meg asked without beating around the bush. Pretty good. The agreement between Lantis and the underground city has been signed, and they've officially joined the underground city. They've also been assigned a territory, and they'll enjoy all the rights of the Underground City Federation, she said. Meg nodded. The system did a lie detector test on she, so she probably did not lie. I would like to know if the dungeon can provide a limited amount of permission to visit relatives. You also know that I have a friend who's the Princess of Lantis. Being alone in Chaos City, it's inevitable that I miss my family and friends. No. She's answer was simple and clear, leaving no room for negotiation. That's too cruel. For example, when you enter and exit the underground city, you can give her a ride, and when you come out, you can bring her along. It won't be long. Meg tried to communicate. She knows about the existence of the underground city, and it's already a special case that she still retains her memory. Once she enters the underground city and understands it better, she'll become a huge threat to the underground city. Therefore, she won't be allowed to leave the underground city, she said calmly. Only entry and no exit. Meg had a rough understanding of the underground city's mechanism. This meant that it was not allowed to enter the underground city through proper channels and return to the Norland continent safely. Since she had said so, Meg did not continue to pester her. This was obviously not something that she could change with her authority. Where's your Big Eagle sniper rifle? Can I borrow it to play with? Meg changed the topic. He was quite interested in Shishi's mechanical anti-material sniper rifle. Men were usually more interested in such things. No, she rejected him coldly. Red braised pork isn't that easy to make. It requires a wild boar that eats a healthy diet, goes to bed early, wakes up early, and exercises regularly. Then, choose streaky pork with a fat and lean belly. Just like the pot of red braised pork, just now, a 500-pound wild boar can only make 3 to 4 servings. After choosing the streaky pork, it's just the beginning. We have to process this meat, blanch it, cut it, smack. Before Mag could finish his sentence, an anti-material rifle was placed in front of him. It was not Shi's. It was slightly smaller, but the style was quite similar. The black metallic luster did not reflect light. Instead, it seemed to absorb light and looked very domineering. Judging from the wear on the stock and trigger, this was not a new gun. It was probably a gun that she often used. "This is the gun I used before. You can take a look," she said. After all, he had eaten several meals of red braised pork for free. This request could be fulfilled. Meg did not stand on ceremony and picked up the sniper rifle. It was more than one, 5 meters long and weighed about 100 pounds. The density of the metal was extremely high. Freakishly strong woman. Meg gave she a new label in his heart. Compared to his Tian-Du sword, it paled in comparison. However, she looked thin and weak, but she was able to hold such a heavy sniper rifle and snipe in seconds. Her strength was not to be underestimated. Mag fiddled with it for a while. Although this gun looked very high-tech, it was still a firearm, so it had some similarities. However, the principle of the original gunpowder explosion in the barrel seemed to have been improved. He could not find out the specifics, but she said that the effective killing range of this gun was 20 kilometers. That was about 10 times the range of the Bartley. Meg looked at the sniper rifle in his hand and felt that the weight did not seem to be a problem. Although it could not make a headshot from 800 miles away, a 20-kilometer shooting range was enough to complete most of the sniping missions. This distance was full of imagination. It was difficult to even take good precautions against a sniper at this distance. "Why don't you try shooting twice?" Meg said. "This shot can penetrate 10 buildings. Are you sure you want to shoot?" She looked at Meg and asked. "Of course, we have to change places. It should be very cool to hunt." Meg was reluctant to put it down. The system would not give him such advanced equipment, and he did not have the skills to make it himself. This is combat equipment. No one will eat prey that has been shot to pieces. She shook her head. "Good guy." Meg was stunned. "What do you usually use to hunt?" Meg continued to be curious. She took out a small caliber shotgun. Compared to Meg's sniper rifle, this gun looked very delicate and was also equipped with a scope. Meg put down the sniper rifle in his hand and picked up the shotgun. The gun was more than 10 pounds, but it felt light in his hand and did not feel much. Sure enough, a real man should use an anti-material rifle. This kind of gadget was for children to play with. "Why don't you sell this gun to me?" Meg looked at Shi and said, pointing at the anti-material rifle. "Not selling," she said without hesitation. "One lifetime free braised pork voucher." Meg offered a price. She frowned and seemed to be in deep thought. "Rice is also free," Meg added. She subconsciously bit her lip and began to struggle. "You can choose another dish. It's also free for life," Meg added. "Deal." She gritted her teeth and nodded. Chapter 22-28. Meg happily put away the sniper rifle and resisted the urge to get another shotgun for free. As a human, one should not always think of getting a free ride. He gave she a lifetime free red braised pork card and got such a powerful and high-tech sniper rifle. No matter how he looked at it, he made a huge profit. Of course, she gave him the sniper rifle so easily because she was sure that he would not wander around with it. After all, the sniper rifle that she had eliminated was no match for the sword in his hand. As for the imitation, did you think that the ancient people's tens of thousands of years of technological advancement was a joke? Norland continent was only half a step into the age of steam technology. If they wanted to imitate this sniper rifle, it would take at least a few hundred years to even analyze the materials. She also thought, this is worth it. Meg took the menu and put it in front of She. He said, there's one more dish. Choose. She's eyes looked around and landed on Buddha jumps over the wall. Meg's eyelids twitched, and he suddenly had a bad feeling. She looked up and met Meg's eyes. She smiled and pointed at it. How about this? This. Actually, expensive doesn't necessarily mean good. It's best if it's suitable, Meg said seriously. I've read this from some jerk in a book before. She pouted. This is nonsense. It's not worth it, Meg said seriously. The Buddha jumps over the wall cost 10,000 copper coins. If she made 3 servings a day, it was hard to say who would win this deal. Then I'll decide next time. She retracted her hand and smiled even more. Sure. Meg nodded. He felt that this woman was not as rigid as she looked. Mag cleared the table and poured a glass of warm water for She. He sat down opposite him and curiously asked, in your underground city, what are those who are above 10th tier called? Extraordinaire, she answered. Meg was a little surprised by her straightforwardness. He did not get the chance to say anything and change the topic. How strong are extraordinaires? Stronger than you. Meg, you don't believe me? She looked at the unconvinced Meg. We'll only know who's stronger after we fight. She shook her head slightly. I've analyzed your speed and strength. You haven't reached the limits of an extraordinary. The data won't lie. Meg, although he was a little unconvinced, Meg believed She's words. There were indeed powerful beings among the ancient ones who had broken through the 10th tier. They were the so-called gods on the Norland continent and the extraordinary beings in the underground city. Are there many of these superhumans? Meg asked curiously. She shook her head. The number of level 10 powerhouses is limited. Naturally, there won't be many extraordinaires. I've always been curious. When the ancient ones left the Norland continent, they were pursuing a higher upper limit. What's so special about the underground world that they could break through the 10th tier upper limit? Meg continued to ask. You should know very well that this question is beyond the scope of your knowledge, she said calmly with a cold expression. Meg shrugged. When it came to the core questions, it was not easy to get the answers out of She. Thank you for your hospitality. She put down an empty glass and got up to walk to the door. At the door, she stopped and turned her head to say, the underground city has always been strictly guarded against prying eyes from the outside world. If you don't want to get into trouble, you'd better restrain your curiosity. Is this a warning? Meg laughed. Sort of. She nodded slightly. Then, is the underground city looking for a son-in-law? Meg asked out of the blue. She turned to look at Meg and frowned. Don't you have a wife? If I don't, will you consider it? Meg looked into her eyes. I'm not interested in men. She looked away and pushed the door open to leave. Interesting. Meg looked at the slowly closing door and gently stroked the anti-material rifle with his fingers. If she didn't like men, did that mean she liked women? No wonder she was so difficult to flirt with. He just didn't know which type she liked. The beast-eared lowly Connie? Vitality dragon maid Mia? Domineering vampire Camilla? Flirtatious succubus Angela? Golden-horned little Wong Jane? Meg held his chin and pondered for a while. He still could not think of a girl to send to seduce She. However, on second thought, it was best not to send a girl to her death. On second thought, it seemed like sending a girl to another girl could not be considered sending a girl to her death. Meg took out his communicator and sent a message to She. Next time, call the girl along and treat you to barbecue. Top-grade beef with fat and lean meat. Skewer it and place it on a charcoal grill. It sizzles with oil, brush with sauce, sprinkle with cumin and chili powder. Eat it while it's hot with a glass of bubbling cold beer. That's life. The other side was silent for a while before replying with one word. Okay. Meg put away his communicator and did not continue to lick. See, whether a girl is easy to flirt with or not depends on whether you can capture her interests. It would be strange if a low-level native like you talked to someone from a higher civilization about Bartley. However, it would be different if you talked about food. As long as she was not a real fairy, she had to eat. On the other hand, she completed her report through the video link in the spaceship. She closed the connection and subconsciously raised her hand to look at the notification bar. There was no new message notification. She was stunned for a while, before putting away the virtual screen with a slightly strange expression. She had always been a loner with almost no friends. No one would contact her except for work messages. However, these days, she would glance at the notification bar from time to time, as if she was looking forward to something. It was a strange feeling. Beep. There was a soft sound. She raised her hand, and the virtual screen automatically opened. There was a new message in the notification bar from Vicky. Sister She, when are you coming to Rodu? I'll treat you to a meal. She looked at this message and was silent for a while. Usually, she would directly reject such messages to get close to her. However, when she thought of the message Meg just sent her, she thought for a while and replied, I'll take you out for barbecue in 2 days. Okay. I like barbecue. You can contact me when the time comes. Sister She is so nice. Vicky replied instantly. What an old bootlicker. Okay. She ended the chat with a word. I can't have too strong of a desire for food. Apart from delicious food, I should record more of the development of the Norland continent civilization, she muttered to herself, and then picked up a book from the bookshelf. Why this book again? Red braised pork is delicious. I'll eat it next time. I wonder how his barbecue tastes. Is it as good as the red braised pork? The laws of the underground city did not seem to have any special requirements for marrying into the family. Some families still had this old practice, but it seemed that marrying into the family was not a very good status. Did he not care? Chapter 22-29. Boss, it's here. Are you sure they're inside? Then what are you waiting for? Let's go in. Wait a minute, boss. There are rules here. You have the queue. I have the queue too. I'm here for business. Look, the one in front is the City Lord of Chaos City and his family. If you think it's appropriate for you to cut the queue, then you can go ahead yourself. I see. Actually, queuing is pretty good. It's more orderly. Ho-Catalan followed Garland and Milo to the back of the queue and lined up properly. Ho-Catalan, who had rushed for the morning flight, finally arrived at Chaos City before noon. After being picked up by Garland, he went straight to Mamie's. He had been on his flying steed for half a day, so of course he wasn't here for lunch. However, he was just in time for lunch, and there was already a long queue outside Mamie's. Even if he wanted to talk to Meg about a collaboration, he had to wait until the lunch service ended. Ho-Catalan glanced at the City Lord Michael's family of 3 and softly said to let the City Lord queue outside in the cold wind to wait for the door to open. This Mr. Mac is indeed, as the rumors say. Garland nodded and said, Mr. Mac is very civilized. Every customer has to abide by the rules set by the restaurant. Otherwise, he will refuse to serve you. You didn't meet any troublemakers? When the City Lord of Chaos City chose to respect this rule, how many idiots do you think would still go against this rule? Garland smiled and softly said, Moreover, Mr. Mac's daughter has 2 very powerful masters. They are the 2 at the front, the Lord of Ice, Julian, and the Lord of Fire, Crassus. Do you think it's okay to be a troublemaker here? It's actually those 2. Ho-Catalan gasped. Crassus' reputation in the Roth Empire was not below Alex's, and everyone knew how powerful his archenemy, Julian, was. He didn't expect Mr. Meg's daughter to have 2 such powerful masters. With these 2 powerful backers, this little rule was naturally nothing. Thank goodness you stopped me just now. How Keto patted Garland's shoulder. If he had gone straight for the door, he didn't know if he would have been whipped 5 times by the 2 old comrades. Did you mention that to Mr. Mac? Ho-Catalan asked softly. This isn't something I can decide. I was afraid that he would misunderstand, so I didn't mention it. I was waiting for you to talk about it yourself. Garland shook her head. Ho-Catalan nodded and frowned as he looked at the signboard that was glistening under the sunlight. She had been quite confident on the way there and had thought of countless plans. But when she really stood in front of Mamie's, she suddenly lost her confidence. Boss, don't worry. Even if the deal doesn't work out, it's not a loss to have a meal here. Maybe you won't even want to leave. Garland comforted. Then I'd like to see if it's really as amazing as you say, Ho-Catalan said with a smile. As a 200-pound Yumaba, he was a gourmet passed down from his ancestors. His father founded Whole Foods and Delicacies and then developed it in his hands. For a long time, he was the pillar of Whole Foods and Delicacies column. Milo, who hadn't found a chance to interrupt, said with a smile, "You don't have to worry about that at all. How can a man who can impress countless foodies with his words disappoint?" Catalan nodded. That was exactly what he was thinking. Meg's column that he wrote himself could be beaten by top gourmets, and his main job was obviously a chef. He had been too busy recently, so he didn't have the chance to come to Chaos City. Today, he had to take the opportunity of his business trip to have a taste. Ho, the new dish today seems to be spicy too. Why don't we order a spicy soup too? Vivian said with a smile as she held her mother's hand. Will it be too spicy? Will there be blisters on our skin tomorrow? Eunice asked worriedly. Mr. Mac's spiciness is not ordinary. We'd better be careful. Michael nodded in agreement. As a victim of the spicy grilled fish, he was very wary of anything that had the word spicy in it at Amy's. Luna smiled, but didn't say anything. She often attended such family gatherings, so she didn't find it awkward. It's all right. We came early, so we'll definitely be able to order the tofu pudding. Just one serving of tofu pudding will solve any skin problems, Vivian assured. That's true. Tofu pudding is delicious and nourishes your skin. Eunice nodded. Then, she turned to look at Luna and stroked her face with a pained expression. Luna, you have to eat more later. You've lost weight, and there are dark circles under your eyes. You must have been staying up late recently, right? Hope Elementary School is doing the inspection. It's a little complicated, but it's almost over, Luna said with a smile. Even though she was far away from home, the gentle and kind Mrs. Eunice always gave her motherly care and warmth. A resigned smile appeared on Michael's face. He didn't have any status in the family to speak of. Seeing as they had already come to an agreement, there was nothing for him to do. The restaurant opened for business, and customers lined up to enter. Vivian and the others sat down in a corner by the window. Even though many people recognized Michael, they didn't approach him to chat. This was a tacit understanding among the customers at Amy's. Even the business discussion at the dining table was canceled. After all, there were still many people waiting in line for an empty seat, so there was no time for them to slowly discuss business. Vivian picked up the menu and quickly found a new dish. She then said, "I want a spicy chicken, a sweet tofu pudding, and a large spicy grilled fish. You can order the rest." Vivian handed the menu to Luna. "If it's a large grilled fish, then it should be enough for us." Luna looked at Michael with a thoughtful smile and said, "Why don't we change it to a small grilled fish and then order a few other dishes?" That's a good arrangement," Michael agreed. "Of course we have to have grilled fish, but we can still have other dishes." The grilled fish had saved Vivian's life. Even though Michael couldn't stand the spiciness, he was still very attached to the dish. "Oh, you don't want to eat grilled fish today? Then I'll order a small one for myself. You can order the other dishes." Vivian nodded. She didn't think that there would be people who didn't want to eat grilled fish. Michael ordered an eggplant with garlic sauce, as well as a bowl of shaved noodles recommended by Vivian. Eunice ordered a bowl of roast goose. She had heard a few friends mention it a few days ago, and she wanted to eat it. Luna ordered a tofu pudding for herself, but didn't order any more dishes after seeing that there were already quite a few main dishes. Vivian cocked her head to one side and whispered into Luna's ear, "You're welcome. It's my father's treat today, and you don't get such an opportunity every day. Luna, just order whatever you want to eat. If we can't finish it, we can take it away," Michael said with a smile. "You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.